Good evening. I'd like to call this April 8th, 2024 School Board Work Session to order. The time is now 5:30. The School Board would like to take this moment to respectfully acknowledge that we are residing on the traditional lands of the Dene people. Our mission is to provide an excellent and equitable education in a safe, supportive environment so that all students will succeed and contribute to a diverse and changing society. Ms. Richardson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Burgess is on Zoom.
Aye.
Miss Meredith Maple,
Here.
Mr. Dorn,
Here.
Mrs. Hardy.
Here.
Thank you. Joya Sanderson. Okay, Joya Sanderson is here. Thank you.
At this time, I'm going to throw it over to Dr. Meinert and Ms. Dillard.
All right, thank you, President Hardy. This is more for the listening public than it is the board, but wanted to go over tonight. We're restarting a series of work sessions going over policies in front of the board. As some of you may remember, we started this work in the fall and looking at transitioning both the structure of our policy manual to AASB's policy manual, and then also looking at some of the model policies that AASB has and reflecting on whether or not we want to adopt those or make edits to our existing policies. And so as we're picking up this work, we're going to start with the bylaws of the school board. This is a continuation of the work session or retreat that we did with AASB going over these policies. I'm very happy to have Diana Dillard here with us this evening, our policy specialist, to guide and facilitate this work. So I'll turn it over to Diana at this time.
Thank you, Dr. Meinert. So like Dr. Meinert said, back in October was that first work session with the board and the executive directors. And at that time, Mr. Dorn was on the group that looked at Article 9, which is your board bylaws. And then in January, after that work session in October, AASB did create a draft manual for the district and provided that. And then in January, we came back together and it was a 2-day retreat where you really dug into that Article 9 and all of those policies that pertain to your bylaws. And Ms. Timmy from AASB was here to facilitate that. And she took all of the edits and the notes from those conversations. And then Ms. President Hardy and I met and went through all of those notes and cleaned up the policies based on your feedback at that time. So what we did was separated out the policies into one group that needs your attention still. So whether it's specific questions or maybe there were a lot of edits made after that work group in January and we wanted to make sure that you looked through them again and approved. And you'll see those policies, and that's the purpose of the work session tonight, is to go through all of the highlighted ones. But we did include all of the other policies that we believe to be completed. And that's the second packet where you see the not highlighted. So you have at least all of the policies that go in that Article 9, but the goal is to work on the highlighted ones. And then originally you had a work session set aside to look at committees specifically. And maybe we'll get to those tonight, maybe we won't, but we'll leave that for the end either way, because that could be its own separate conversation. As far as what this looks like moving forward, we would hope that we can get to where we have the full Article 9 packet approved by the board, and then we would submit it to the board for the first reading, or the report reading and reading as a full packet. And that is the goal for all of the other articles too. Since that work session back in October, we've done work internally, meeting with department heads to go through all of the policies, take the feedback that was brought in at that first work session, and kind of finalize those policies to be ready to go for board approval. And those would also be coming to work session, and we have that scheduled out at this time. Next week, depending on how this conversation goes, or possibly the week after, we would be looking at Articles 0, 1, and 2. And then it would be Articles 3 and 6. And then dates not scheduled yet, but possibly in June, Dr. Meinert said we'd be looking at 4 and 5. So 4 and 5 are personnel and students, and then 3 is business non-instructional, 6 is instructional, and a whole bunch of other policies. So yeah, a lot of policy to look at. So for starting out, I would say we just start with the first policy that we have in our highlighted packet, which is going to be 9,000, role of school board and board members. And this is one actually that the group, I think, was pretty much done with. However, in looking through other policies, as we've moved through all of the articles, they kind of circle back around on themselves sometimes. And there is a policy in ours, 321.3, that has to do with hiring practices for superintendent. And so this felt appropriate for being in this policy. And since you hadn't had a chance to look at that yet, we brought it back to you. I would also mention that in looking at hold on. Well, look at that first and I'll bring up my other notes.
Don't want to rush anybody. We're good. My one thing is just the clerical, you've got A capitalized instead of making process
Oh,
and
yeah.
vote should be.
Thank you.
But other than that, I think that that's a fine place for that to live and clarifies the role of the board. And so for the most part, Ms. Dillard said this, we just went through, we spent part of a day taking all of the notes that Timmy had taken and then just going through and making sure. And so if it's highlighted, that was stuff that I wasn't sure where the board was, that I was like, it needs to come back. We need to know exactly where everybody lies. And then these ones were ones that we had really clear notes of like, this is, everyone had consensus, everybody knew what they wanted. So those are the non-highlighted policies, if that makes more sense. So we're kind of just going through and making sure that we have to do the least amount of edits from the dais and try to get them captured here. Mr. Dorn.
So just a couple of things on the 9,000. That box at the beginning can just be deleted since it just references regional schools.
Yes, and I would just say, I think the goal was to not keep in all of those notes, but as I've been going through editing, it's been helpful because it kind of explains maybe why certain things are in a policy or not, because it's highlighting the statutes or the laws, but ultimately, if the board doesn't want to see those notes in all the policies, we can definitely take them out.
Right, and I agree with some of that, because later on, there are some boxes that I'm glad are left. Okay, but this one is specifically regional school boards, the REAAs.
Thank you.
So that's why I would. Okay. Just an observation from me, that I like the school board's mission there. And that we just keep in mind that if we change our mission statement, that we update policy as, especially as we go into strategic planning, we may have a different mission statement. But otherwise, I think that's a good spot and doesn't change that often. You want to keep going? I have just a couple others.
Go ahead, Mr.
Okay.
Dorn.
Had a question when we talk about state and federal law, constitutions, laws and regulations, it's in that second paragraph. Do we need to reference borough laws regularly, because we are impacted by some borough laws? There are relatively few, but there are some. So that was
Should we
just
write
a
local?
question.
So state, yeah, local, state, and federal.
That's,
Regulations, I think, local regulations.
yeah, I mean, we have a couple that impact our elections actually more than other things, but okay, yeah, that's fine.
Or just put local right in front of,
Local.
All right. Okay. Number 5, school facilities. I think we're okay on that, but again, I'm just to cross-check that we're in keeping with the borough, since they actually purchased the property, and I think we're okay with recommending that basically and I think there may be something in borough that we are consulted on in that regard. And I believe, yes, we do approve the building plans within their guidance, but I'm just cognizant of the partnership we have with the borough, if we need to phrase that a little bit differently in accordance with borough processes, because we follow that for bids and all of that would be involved in this. So it's more of a question, I'm not sure, but want to make sure we're in keeping with that.
we can certainly take that back, and I can follow up with Chief Operating Officer to see what we might need to do to update that policy before it comes before the board.
Yeah, okay. And I know there's a process when we set our educational specs and request all of those things, so, all right. And the last one I had on here, when we talk about annual priorities, check where that is. No, it is,
It may be right above, the paragraph right
5.
above judicial functions.
yes, that's where it is. Great, thank you. Yeah. And the one thing, I guess that would be addressed within AR or something, or just how we want to do that to make sure. Because we haven't generally done it, or it couldn't be incorporated in to the strategic plan, I don't know, but it was just a question that I had.
I had one other thought. At the last work session, we added 1 through 6, so those numbers right at the very beginning, those numbered functions that came from our policy 221. And the notes said to not include number 7. And number 7 actually states, the board is responsible for acting as a court of appeals for staff members, students, and its fair implementation, and that seemed significant to me. I know the last paragraph in this policy does speak to judicial functions, but it sounds more like it's just referencing employee grievances, so I don't know if there was a reason why number 7 wasn't included. Because number 7 is part of our 221 policy.
Do you know which policy we moved those numbers from?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it had actually been included somewhere or was just not included. At the first work session, the model policy was accepted, and at the second work session, we added that 221 and 221.1. Let me see if I can. Yeah, so that was our policy that was brought over. The 221 was our policy from board docs that the work group requested be embedded in this AASB model policy, but the notes just said not to include number 7 out of the 1 through 7.
Mr. Doran, that was your group during that bigger work session, right? Do you remember why you might have? I'm not seeing it in what Timmy gave us here. Like, I don't even remember the numbers. They're not a part of this.
I think that was actual notes from the second work session in January. So if we feel that it's appropriate here, then I can plug it back in. Yeah, okay.
I would say that it's an important function, even though it says it in the judicial, sort of those functions afterwards, after that list, kind of elaborates on them. But if we're saying what our main duties are, it's important that we remember that we have that judicial function, so I would include 7.
Okay. Is there any other comments or questions about this policy 9000? Seeing nothing. The next one flagged for review is 9012.
I was just gonna ask if we could reference the number of the page at the top.
Yes.
Number 6, page 6.
Thanks.
Let me get the same one you're looking at, or I'm going to be calling out the wrong page numbers. Okay, so this one was accepted at the first work session. We added some of our own language from policy 276 to the overall ASB model policy. The question that we were coming back to for this one was between option number 1 and option number 2 that you can see on page 7.
Mr. Doran? Nope,
If someone wants to go
Sure.
first.
go for it.
For a conversation, I lean towards 1, but then I go to 2 and I go back and forth, and I think it's more the intent of what this is. That if it's a general, okay, somebody sends me, because they know me and they send it to me as board member, and I respond, I think that should go to the president and the superintendent. But I wouldn't want the choice of one of these options avoiding the situation that there may be something that I want to ask the superintendent that may not be necessary to, it's just a question kind of type of thing. He can give me the answer, why bother the board president? you know, if it's a general thing that, like, and I'm just using the example, superintendent report where it's going to go to the board, I think that should be to both, for instance. So I'm just trying to figure out what are we meaning by concerning the district, how broad an understanding as that is.
And I know this had a lot of discussion, and I've kind of moved back and forth on it too. About a month ago or so, I actually had the opportunity to talk to Ms. Tuttle, and I brought this up with her. And I was like, there's, debate going on around this. What happened with previous boards? You were here forever. And she kind of gave me a whole lot of peace about it. And she was like, well, really, the president shouldn't be getting everything because their inbox becomes a lot. And I'm currently experiencing that. But she said that leaning on the administrative assistant to feel if this is something that looks like it's rising to that level of the president needs to be aware, taking over that and forwarding things through there. So, but it's not every single time, every time a board member sends an email, it has to be CC'd to both people. I think there's pros and cons. I think also always having it be the superintendent, it means we're trusting our superintendent, who then will also kind of like, you need to loop the board president into this. This has risen to something. And I think that alleviates some of the concerns that board members were feeling, because it felt like out of that work session, people were very comfortable with the superintendent always being in the loop and not so comfortable with the board president.
I'd like to address.
Go ahead, Mr. Burgess.
Okay, thank you. That is not the case for me. I feel I am concerned. I do have a concern with it going to the superintendent as well. And I think I don't know if that was clear at the last work session, but part of the challenge there is the board is the superintendent's supervisor. And I think that it's somewhat problematic for a superintendent to be reviewing communications to the board that may involve staff or concerns about the superintendent themselves. When we're trying to do our business and supervise an employee, I think that it's problematic for that employee to automatically be reading all of our emails.
Ms. Maple and then Ms. Sanderson.
To what Mr. Burgess just said, so my concern goes to the same place, because we create policy that protects us when things aren't going as we want them to. So like with our current superintendent, I don't have any concerns with Dr. Meinert seeing any of my correspondence. However, I know that where Ms. Marati's concerns sort of came up with this were that when she realized that this was the policy, it made a lot of things very clear about what had happened under the interim, that there were conversations that she believed to be privileged between her and specifically our borough attorney, that now a lot of things made sense because that person had their eyes on those emails. And so I think, echoing what Mr. Burgess said, that if we're a supervisor and an issue does arise, that it really ties hands on how anything could ever be addressed, brought forward, even if it's irrelevant, but brought forward for the board to say, this is not of our concern. So I think that's, I know that that's where Erin's initial concern came from, and I share that since she's not here. I hope that that's okay with her. I don't necessarily out of these options have a solution for that. I don't know if there's a consideration that could be made that is using our executive assistant, where it's truly the purpose is just for record retention, but that the purpose is for it to be shared with CARM and that be the end of that, that then it's shared beyond our email? I don't know. I don't have a suggestion, to be honest, but I can say where that issue, where that was rooted from, so.
Ms. Sanderson?
So having been privy to different emails flying around your head, it's a good check and balance system that the emails are seen, period. Because the board handles just so much work, but the superintendent has an overall view. Even though we manage that person, they have an overall view of things we don't have. And, you know, it all sits on the foundation of integrity. If you're not doing anything cloak and dagger in the background or underneath the table, you don't have to worry about it. Whatever, if you stand by the words that you put, and me, I just look at the camera's always rolling. So, you know, some of this language and some of these policies are stemmed in history of, you know, not being comfortable or being forthcoming and thinking the superintendent's doing one thing, the board's doing something else, when basically the responsibility is that we conduct our business in, you know, for the health of our students and staff and the district reputation. So no matter what language we put in here, as a president, I've had, you know, emails not come to me and go everywhere else. And then when it creates a storm outside of the board, then now I, as the president, I have to deal with something that I should have been informed on. So I just say be forthcoming with what you're doing. And, you know, at least one board member always used to say, hey, Troy, expect a letter, expect a note, expect an email. I sat down, I did an email. So it was never a surprise to me. It's just that when we have those aha, gotcha moments, they don't feel so good for a superintendent or board president or the board when it falls back on us. So whatever language we choose, it just needs to be honest, that we conduct the business of the district in that manner. So that we have a check and balance, because ultimately the superintendent will report to the board on whatever the matter is, but they have a responsibility for the integrity of keeping things, and then they would inform the board. And so far, we've had that done. So that's my history on it.
So I'll go, and then Mr. Doran. I would not be comfortable with having only CARM be the one who has eyes on it, much for the reason that Ms. Sanderson stated. And also ASB, you know, they're very good about telling us we're not supposed to be micromanaging our superintendent, that we have hired them, we pay them a good salary to trust them to take care of our entire district. And whether or not that's Dr. Meinert or someone who comes after Dr. Meinert, I understand that we've been burned in the past, but ideally we need to trust and support our superintendent, and a well-functioning board, that's what we should be doing. I don't mind if the board president isn't in there, because we're once again trusting the superintendent, who should then be in constant communication with the board president and looping them in when things rise to that level. And I think we write policies for when things go wrong, but that checks, because also board members can go rogue too, and you need a check and balance on the board member. We're just community members. Some of us, you know, have different thoughts and opinions, and it helps, given that this is a government entity that affects the lives of thousands of people, both employees and children, every day. And board members have a big impact on that. Our actions impact the community around us. So having one of those two, I am fine having it not be the board president in there, but I feel firmly that we need to at least have our superintendent in there as our chief executive, as a check and balance. Mr. Doran.
Trying to think of different wording. I think part of the confusion here is we have communication about some district concern. We also have mixed in the storage issue. And it's really not, if it's a storage issue, that really is under the superintendent through our executive assistant, who makes sure that these are all stored, recorded, and are available to the public if we want. And just tossing out a word phrasing, I'm almost thinking along the lines of an and or. Yeah, I think, or being mindful of keeping the superintendent and board president informed. Kind of along, I wanted to use the gotchas, but that's not a good phrase to put in policy. But, you know, I think maybe if we said as a guideline here that a board member sending an electronic communication concerning the district may copy the superintendent and or should be mindful of keeping the superintendent and board president informed. It leaves it a little bit open, and I'm not sure I'm wedded to that wording, but just that, you know, if there are something that, you know, I can just write to the superintendent and quickly get it, or to the board president and quickly get it. I think one of the issues, if something's not getting to somebody, we also had, part of our orientation as a board is, as a board member, is, you know, if we have a concern with the superintendent, you know, you hopefully you have talked to that person, but it's going to the board president, because that's a board issue, not just, you know, potentially, although it could just be my issue. He rubs me the wrong way, or whatever. So I'm just spanning it out a little bit, but I think trying to address, because it's come up enough times, who do we need to send something to make sure? The fact of the matter is that these are all readable. Whether we copy, or, you know, Carm or not, Carm knows, she watches out and she reads them, appropriately so. But there are some things that might just be going between the board president and the, you know, yes, our executive assistant has access to that, but the direction is really between, at a different level. So the copying is one issue, and that's maintained by the executive assistant. So, anyway, be mindful is what I'm kind of.
What I would propose, since I don't think it's appropriate even to find consensus on this, because we know that board members who aren't here have feelings on it too, that we leave it as these two options and know that that will probably be a motion during a meeting, so that that's how we find board consensus. And if somebody has alternative options of a different way they'd like worded, then we can bring that in and we'll vote up or down and end up with a motion that way.
Can I
Dr. Minor? Yeah.
provide a recommendation on that? I guess my recommendation would be to leave option 2 in like this draft policy. Get rid of option 1 so that you have a clean draft coming before you, and then board members can make a motion on that specific area, and we'll, in the first reading, be sure to point that out for folks so that that doesn't get lost in the adoption part of the policy.
And I'd be supportive of that, dropping the one option, and then, you know, so we know what we're really talking about, and we can amend therefore, and I've made a notation on mindful or something. I would suggest that probably the second sentence of that is not needed, because it's not a storage issue that we're really talking about here. It's the.
And that's already guided by state regulations outside the policy.
Right.
Maple?
Can I just ask, in theory, if there were an issue with our superintendent, a future superintendent, that somebody needed to bring forward, is there a method outside of contacting the board that would be done? Like, is that something, does HR have a mechanism to, like, how does that exist?
I was just going to add in thinking about and hearing this conversation is we actually have policy that any and all complaints, to include complaints about the superintendent, must be reported to the superintendent. That's in our current policy, and that's going to be captured in Article 1 here in the near future. So,
And so in practice, I guess how that would happen is most likely a meeting or a conversation with the board member and that individual person. And then if that individual person hasn't brought the concerns forward to the superintendent, they should probably do that, because we try to resolve issues at the lowest level possible. If they're not comfortable doing so, of course, that can be worked through a board member, and then that board member would be required to take that information to the superintendent so they could rectify the situation. And then if they felt like that wasn't appropriately rectified, then that's a part of the evaluation process that the board conducts throughout the year, and we work through that.
Okay, that piece is in Article 1, you said?
that is a current policy that we have right now in board docs. And then it's also captured in the migration over to ASB in Article 1.
Okay, that sounds, I mean, like, I know that for my board policy, or in our handbook, tiny, tiny, tiny potatoes, but it's, that if my staff are not comfortable going to me, if for whatever reason it's an issue with me and that they're not comfortable, it's going to a board member, that then the board member does theirs. So that's very comparable, but something in policy that speaks to that makes me feel more comfortable with this. So thank you.
Mr. Doran?
And I think it's important to note that in our contracts, and I'm particularly familiar with the principals one, but I believe in the others, it's not actionable unless it's reported to the individual that the complaint is.
Right.
So that would be very consistent, because superintendent hears any complaint, but any action on that would be through the board. It's not through.
Mr. Burgess?
So a couple things. One is that another thing that concerns me about the superintendent automatically receiving communications is that we have seen in the past that sometimes those communications then get talked about or somehow get back to other people, other members of the community. And we've seen, in Miss Maple had an example in which someone's supervisor was informed of an email that was written to the board, and that person felt as if they were punished because of that. So I would like to, I don't have the language, but I would like to see language in this that, or possibly in an AR, that spells out where the communication stops and make sure that any communication that goes to a superintendent should not be passed on to the community, certainly without first talking to the board member who initially received the communication. And preferably it should not go to any other individual beyond the superintendent or the executive assistant. The other point I was going to make has escaped me for the moment. Apologies.
Can I ask, because you're an expert on our policies, do we have, I know I should probably know this, somewhere where it outlines, like, this is our board governance that talks about the superintendent's roles and responsibilities in policy somewhere?
Yes, that will be Article 2, and that mirrors our Chapter 3.
Could we put in somewhere like Mr. Burgess just suggested within there, something about before communications that have come from the community or that involve a board member, that the superintendent should confer with that board member before actioning, taking action? So in that same instance, just having said, hey, Miss Maple, I'm thinking about doing this, and get some feedback?
I'm a little confused on what you're talking about.
There was,
So-
oh, go ahead, Mr. Burgess.
Yeah, so the, the action is one part of it, right? If the superintendent decides to take action, but I'm talking about just communications, and it might be a casual thing. Oh yeah, there was this email today about such and such issue, talking to a staff member or someone in the community, and then through the grapevine, it gets back around to people. Like that's the issue that I'm talking about, and I just feel like it should be clear that, absent a public records request, that we don't need to be, and shouldn't be talking about concerns that people bring up to us with other members of the community that aren't involved. Because of the way that this gets, because of this example where someone's supervisor found out and the person essentially got in trouble or felt like they had gotten in trouble. Like, I just feel like it's not appropriate for anybody to be sharing beyond the people that the email was intended for, in the absence of a public records request.
Dr. Minor.
All right, so this was a very specific instance, and I just want to clear the record that it wasn't hearsay, nor did I go out and talk to people outside in just kind of a nonchalant way. I think Ms. Maple and I have worked through this situation, and I might have acted quickly on it because there was a concern of student safety, and so with our North Star College program, wanted to make sure that both institutions understood what was happening, and so that's the direction I took in that instance. And so, I think that instance was very specific, but the superintendent obviously is covered under needing to be confidential in the matters and professional in the matters that he or she goes about. And so, a bit of this is trusting your superintendent to do that work and being a professional in the way that they are. Not saying that we can't build policy around it, but the instance with Ms. Maple was pretty specific, and I realized I might have acted pretty quickly in that instance.
I think I would just, not any more information. That's-
Can I?
Ms. Sanderson.
I would just say again, there's so much you can regulate and there's so much you cannot. You take the oath, you say you're gonna do a certain thing, conduct yourself a certain way, and then, that's what you have to do. That's what it boils down to. It boils down to your integrity, the foundation that we build, and how we conduct ourselves. There have been numerous things that have happened in the past before I was even on the board, and you notice and hear. But, the bottom line is you cannot regulate people's moral value and how they live their life or conduct themselves. But you can have a policy in place when that standard is not met, then you bring the standard to bear and say, this is our standard, or board norms, or whatever you want to say, and this is how we conduct our business, and you violated that, and so whatever, you go from there. But, so.
Mr. Doran.
Okay, I'm going to suggest we primarily go to another area, bring this up later if necessary, because I think it is addressed about personnel issues and confidentiality in another section of Chapter 9 or Title 9, whatever, the 9,000s, as well as this addresses general communication to and from the board. But we are well covered, I believe, in all contracts, and I'm thinking even the superintendent's contract has method of how we address personnel things, and beyond the superintendent, all personnel is to the superintendent. So if something comes to our attention, we let the superintendent know, but then we're out of it. And I think So, but I think we're well covered elsewhere as well, in other policies, as well as in the contracts.
So I'm hearing that we don't need option 1. We'll keep option 2 minus that last sentence about record retention, not needed. And then that option 2 will just be something that can be a motion when it comes to the board. I can make sure to pay attention to cross-references to other policies that might be helpful in this section right here. And then we can think about this as other policies come up that might pertain to it.
Yeah. And maybe as you're looking at things, I'm sorry, I jumped in. But as you're looking at it, and maybe if other places address it, it's kind of that mindful about information. They should be informed. There may be exceptions to that, you know, depending upon who it may be referring to. But general district business should go to both, especially if it's coming possibly to a board meeting. It's good to know that we might get testimony, or it might be something we want to talk about.
So can we say that it's the board member's responsibility to identify when the issues need to be addressed? And I'm sorry, I jumped the line here, Brandy. I
I
mean,
can't see your
President-
hand, so you're fine. Continue.
Yeah. I just, and when we're talking about integrity and trust, I wonder if, by automatically sharing everything, I understand that the superintendent or the board president can get a handle if there is a board member that is not acting in trust and integrity. But at the same time, are we assuming that that's what how board members are going to act? Integrity and trust is for all of us. And, I don't know. I just want to throw that out there. It feels like the automatically sending emails to a superintendent or board president is being distrustful of board members and their ability to identify issues that need to come to attention. It should be, in my opinion, it should be on the board member to decide what information needs to get shared. And yeah. And if we're assuming that they're not going to do that, then it feels like that we're not trusting them. So, yeah, okay.
Mr. Doran?
I appreciate the point that Mr. Bird just mentioned, which just tells out, what if we had neither option?
I think that there's enough debate around this that it deserves to be a motion in front of the board. And if it turns out to be neither option, so it gets voted down and no option is brought forward, then that is also an option. But we have 2 board members not here, and I know I don't lean towards neither option, so I still think our best course of action is to have a robust debate. We know it's going to be one, and then we're all going to vote our conscience, and the chips will fall where they may. And future boards can bring this up again and have those same debates.
I agree. I also, there's at least one board member that is absent that I have no idea what their thoughts are at all. So I think it warrants, and I don't think it means that we need another special session on it. But I do, yeah. And I mean, to be completely honest, like, I would appreciate the time to really go back and reflect on what I want to bring forward. Because as I said earlier, like, yeah, I've got concerns, and I also have no suggestions for improvement, which is not helpful at all. So I would appreciate that opportunity, and then be able to make sure that we have full board engagement to make sure that whatever we land on is amenable to at least the majority.
Thank you. Okay, the next policy is going to be on page 9, and it's 9110, school board memberships. This was originally replaced with R220, and then at that second work section, The group did work to add in military delegate and school student member language from AASB and the format of AASB's policy. We flagged this to discuss the addition of a tribal advisory seat. And then the notes also did say a possible administrative regulation, but I did not see notes, or I'm not sure exactly what that would address specifically unless it was pertaining to the tribal advisory seat.
I can provide clarity on that. Oh, no, never mind, it's not committees. I think the AR that I was thinking of was for committees. So I think it was around if it went to that, how that seat would be chosen, because that is a whole other discussion of here is how that would come about and who would get to appoint and all of those things. Mr. Doran, were you? I was just providing the clarity. If you want to start us off, you're welcome to.
So if it's a question of a tribal advisory seat on the board, as I've said before, I have strong feelings against having it. We have the elective options, and we've had Alaska Native members on the board that have served really well and have been vocal. My concern is if we, for our borough, if we have one advisory seat of this nature, what about for other groups? And so I have some real concerns. I am glad that you seem to make a distinction between here as an advisory seat and conversation that might happen over committees and representation on committees, because I think they're very, very different situations.
Dr. Minert, you're welcome to jump in here too. I'll kind of give like a broad overview of pieces that I know are moving. We have an upcoming joint work session with FNA, and so that is coming up. I know from different board members that there are board members who are in support of this idea, and we have board members who aren't, so it's a board decision and discussion. The Sitka School Board is also moving in this direction and will likely have a tribal advisory seat on their board by the end of this year. And it was something that ASB also came and said that they were supportive of in helping boards figure this out. And I know, Dr. Minert, you had some reasons why you felt. Go ahead.
Yeah, so one of my first conversations with Executive Director Steve Guinness with Fairbanks Native Association, he asked where we were at in this process, because this was something he's been passionate about through his tenure with FNA, and would like to see Fairbanks take that step of having a tribal advisory seat. Up to 25% of our students are Alaska Native. So it is a large group within our borough, and I realize sometimes we have Alaska Native individuals on our board, but in the absence of that, I do think their voice is not always heard at the board level, and so I think it's worth the board's discussion, especially as we have a work session with FNA coming up in their mediated agreement, just talking through that and what our partnership looks like and ways that we can strengthen the partnership to ensure that all of our Alaska Native students are performing well in school.
Ms. Maple.
Can you remind me when that's calendared for, then, the first one?
The 29th, the work session.
Yeah.
Yeah, the 29th.
So is that before this would come before us?
It is.
So we can talk about this now and then walk away from that meeting with more context to bring into a final discussion on this, perhaps perhaps final discussion being the same format as the last one, that it's when it actually comes before the board rather than another one of these?
Yep, and 3 times before the board, so you'll have
And then 3
multiple
times before the board.
conversations.
Wow. I think that that'll be a really powerful piece to be able to hear from, especially from folks at FNA, about where, will Mr. Guinness still be, is he? Yeah, will he be gone from his retirement?
He will still be in the executive director role at the end of this month through middle of next month.
Okay.
So he might not see, like, if this were to become policy, you might not see that while he's in the executive director role, but he'll
But
be
he'll be
here
able to
in Fairbanks.
participate in this
and-
conversation.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, excellent. Because I would like to hear from him. I've gotten to speak with him privately, but not in a more robust conversation about it. I will just say, for the record, that I do feel very strongly about having a tribal advisory seat, and I will say I've spoken with quite a few former board members that are against it, and tried to do my due diligence to understand beyond just our conversations where that comes from and those reasonings, and not just turn a blind eye to them. And I do hear, I especially hear what Mr. Doran said, that, like, if we're creating a slippery slope, if we're setting a precedent that we don't want to set, I feel that that in the community in which we live, especially the population within our schools, that it is a pretty unique scenario that, at the very least, I, as a sitting board member, it would be really hard to twist my arm to believe that this specific scenario applies elsewhere. But I get that I won't be on the board for forever. So I just want to acknowledge that I hear the concerns, but I do think that it is a progressive, positive step forward to better serve our students as a whole, to meet our mission. And I look forward to the FNA joint session to learn more.
President Hardy.
Go ahead, Mr. Burgess.
I would echo Ms. Maple's comments. This is a somewhat different situation from other potential groups that could get brought in. My personal feeling is that I wouldn't necessarily mind if certain other groups felt like they wanted a larger voice, and I know there's concerns about expanding the board too far, but we have military advisors because we have military bases that we operate on. I think having a tribal advisor is appropriate because we are operating on tribal land. We acknowledge that in our mission statement, and that's where it falls for me. That's why this is a different situation from bringing in potentially other groups.
Ms. Sanderson.
So we've had input from Dr. Ott about our African American students, just taking this as far as it's going to go, and how that representation has not been met by our district. But the district, I feel, there are open invitations at any time for any concerned citizen or group to come before us, and we've had that happen. So it's just an interesting perspective, and I understand the representation because of who we serve in our population. But voices have not been silenced. There are, our Alaska Native students have a really powerful voice in their A&E director, their A&E tutors, and their parent board that meets also to set precedents and governance concerning the direction of Alaska Native students. It's just something to think about.
Mr. Doran.
Several things. If I understand, the meeting with FNA is to look at the implementation agreement. Is that
I believe
Which
that's
we-
a part of the work session. That's correct.
right? Which does have a piece that actually has an annual review that talking together, what is the district doing to support Alaska Native students? What is FNA doing to support Alaska Native students, a real partnership? They have heard years ago when I was board president, and we were doing the implementation updates, and so they know where, at that time, I stood on this issue, and there was general agreement at that time. The other thing, so I think this needs to be separated from FNA. I would suggest also that we don't do this within a big package, because it has real implications for our entire community. It does bring the whole representation, diversity piece together. I've been here long enough to have sat in the audience side of things and heard comments that there's no black member on the board. There's no Alaska Native member on the board. There's no Hispanic member on the board. Different times, different references. This particular idea of Alaska Native representative or advisory member on the board has come up from various groups. FNA has raised it, yes. A&E Parent Committee has raised it and said they should have an advisory position on the board. It's who should have that. It's interesting where we're using the reference of tribal. Okay. Who is the tribal entity for that, for us, in Fairbanks? It's not FNA. It's not Doyon. It's not A&E. Okay, so it's the who does that. It's the big picture of what are we trying to do in representing that. So, you know, I think, yes, it's come up often enough over the years. It's worth a discussion. I would hate to see it get sidelined or hidden in a big package. Not intentionally to hide it, but to get lost in that conversation, or that it hinders us from going forward. Because if we want to have another advisory member, I think it's a broader conversation than what it's going to take time. And understanding of the implications, the dynamics of that. Does it open that door that we want to start adding more advisory members? Let's not do a piecemeal. Let's take a bigger look at the picture. So I would say let's, you know, it will come up in the implementation conversation. That's not where it ends. So I would say let's set it, and we can always add it to policy. I mean, if that would happen, that we have an advisory committee for one specific group, then we would just add that into policy. But that's going to take a longer conversation and with more parties. And so we should be able to have those parties and develop that community support for it. As I believe, you know, mentioned Sitka, there are other dynamics in Sitka that really lends to their conversation. They've been talking about that for quite some time and working it out. What does it mean for Sitka and for the bigger picture? We're different than Sitka. What are those elements? I think we need to look at that give it its own due. But I have real reservations what we're trying to, you know, so I've said it.
So I'm going to put myself in the queue, and then Ms. Maple. Just to correct for the record, I know Mr. Doran said it, but there's nobody sneaking anything in by anywhere at all. This was brought up at our policy retreat, and then it was flagged for review. These policies were the contentious ones that will be passed unless we find consensus, which other than our first one, we have not found. And so they will come up as individual reviewed policies that have 3 separate readings and a vote. So opportunity 3 separate times. I guess the first one's informational, right? So there's not testimony on informational, but you can testify during the non-agenda items on those things. So we are absolutely in no way trying to silence public. In fact, inviting the public and making this a conversation. Before I was ever on the board, there was a diversity committee memo sent to the board asking for this, and that one is quite a few years old. The most recent was 2021. I know that the diversity committee is working on revamping that and sending another one to the board. So this is a discussion that parts of our community are asking to have. And like many discussions, sometimes they create change and sometimes we stay where we are. And the point of it, like ASB likes to remind us, is that we do our work forward facing in front of our public and they get to hear these discussions. And so my intent, and I don't think any of our intent tonight was to decide this. This was once again to flag, if anyone's listening, or for all board members, you know, we have some who are rejoining us. This is a discussion that the board is looking to have. And so we should start collecting our information and figuring out where we land on those things. And we're not all going to land in the same spot, just like we didn't with emails. But it is a discussion. I know once I found out about the mitigated agreement and the diversity committee memo, it was one I was looking forward to having this year. And that's the whole point of the work that we do, is to have those courageous conversations and discussions and to get robust community input from all of our stakeholders and listen and be thoughtful about our decisions. Ms. Maple.
I was just gonna say, I don't want to see it pushed off, whether my feelings on the matter end up in the majority, I don't know. But that, you know, I think that this is an appropriate time and opportunity and context to discuss this, and that that the timing is beyond it just being an appropriate time within our policy work, that the timing in our community and in our society is relevant. Even if I am in the minority on where I hope it falls. But I would be sad to see it pushed off into a different format of discussion outside of this policy work.
President Hardy?
Mr. Burgess.
So I think that, you know, a couple things. When it comes to having this conversation with the public, I think that it's very important that we reach out and solicit comment from various communities. And part of that is because even though voices may not have been silenced in these communities, they don't always feel welcomed. And that's the impression that I've gotten from many people who I've talked to, is that they don't feel welcomed. They don't feel comfortable giving public testimony even, because of various reasons, not always even including the board itself, but the audience, or other factors, but sometimes include, you know, they don't feel welcomed here. And then this isn't just the Native community either, this is others, but they don't feel welcomed because of the responses they get from board members or the board as a whole. And so I think that it's on us when we're talking about being inclusive, seeking voices. It's on us not to just say, you can come here and talk to us, but to reach out to them. And so I'd like to see us, as we work on this, actually all these policies, this actually is what I had forgotten on the board communications policy as well. I'd like to reach out and survey the public on that policy, but on this one as well, because it's incumbent on us, I think, as representatives of the community, to make sure that the community does feel welcome and to seek out their voices, not just receive communications passively, but actually go out and seek out these voices. And that is also why I would be supportive of a FNA representative on the board, because that's a way for us to welcome and seek out the voice of the community whose lands we are on.
Mr. Doran, but if it's continuing the debate, I'm going to just say we're going to try to move through.
That's fine. You can, I just want a clarification. Are we talking about an FNA representative on the board or a tribal advisory member? That is a really, really important distinction as we go forward. I favor the conversation. We need to have it. It's come up from different groups, but we have at least 4 major Alaska Native groups in town, and the title, the purpose of it is going to be real important. And if it's a diversity member coming from diversity committee, that's another whole thing. So that's why I say, let's have the conversation, but let's make sure we involve the people and the broader thoughts that are involved.
Thank you. Well put. I don't believe this is coming before the board in any real time period, at least not until after the 29th, when we can have a conversation with them and then others and gather more input. It is just putting this out there again for the community, and it says tribal advisory on here. So it's very broad and general and not prescriptive. All right. Ms.
I'm
Dillard.
sorry. It is that has a very specific connotation, and I'll leave it there.
Okay.
So just a quick comment and then a question to follow up and wrap this policy up. The comment is, for the advisory members, the language did say that the board shall appoint, and we changed that to accept the appointment of. So whatever that looks like moving forward, if there were to be a new advisory board member, then of course it's very key who's appointing that person. But the question is, as far as moving this policy forward, do we want to move it forward and leave no additions in it? And if somebody wanted, we could either after the meeting have more information and put in a suggestion for the actual board process, or would it be a motion that somebody would make to put language into this policy?
I would feel comfortable if Dr. Meinert and his team were to flesh something out that they feel, including yourself, would be representative, and maybe more than one option to present the board with, here are what this could look like, confer with Sitka, confer with other places, talk to ASB, give us, framework or guardrails. Mr. Doran.
Okay, if I understand the question, you were talking about the current advisory members, that we just accept the appointment. So that's the 2 military and the student. And I think that's it. I don't think that we necessarily have to do a formal action each time. And I don't think you were necessarily implying that, but I wasn't certain.
No, sorry, just highlighting that we did change that language to be more reflective of how the process occurs. Yeah.
So I think, when we recognize that we have a new person that should do that, the one thing I would just put in the hopper, not for policy, but that for administration in terms of just looking around the student representative, I've noticed over the last dozen years, maybe, or less, there's been a lot more confusion. In some years, it's been hard to get a student rep, advisory member. This may have already been addressed a little bit by administration, but just a process as the Regional Student Council sponsor changes, it has not necessarily carried over, understood what the process is, and so I think that we've gotten a little more clarity on that, but I think that would be helpful with it, not in our policy, but procedurally for how that's done.
Dr. Meinert.
Yeah, and I think one of the things Mr. Doran and I have talked about is when I came on as the assistant superintendent for secondary schools, the board's wishes at that time was to have a senior serve as the student representative. That is in their bylaws, but not reflected in board policy. And so I don't know if the board has a strong feeling on, what age group they require the student rep to be, but that might be something that the board looks at, that they accept a senior as the student rep if the board is feeling as strongly now as the board did at that point in time.
I feel like maybe we shouldn't be prescriptive in so much that Matsu, they had a really amazing student rep that started as a junior and was able to serve 2 terms. And I felt like watching that was a real good voice for those students. And so sometimes letting people have some autonomy in doing that, if there's a strong junior that the students feel represent them and they elect that, they do an election to choose that rep, then we give the students that option instead of telling them that it has to be a senior. Mr. Doran.
I'm in between. We got really, really loose. And we've had sophomores, and we've had people who've come in and they have thought they select their person to follow them, or they were in for 2 or 3 years, until they graduated. There's been a lot of confusion. I think, we have generally had it as a senior. There might have been an occasional junior, but I cannot remember until we've had some excellent sophomores. They were very, very good, but it really ran into some, expectation issues. So I do favor senior. It should not be in policy. I would put it as according to, their bylaws, et cetera. But I think the expectation, I would certainly argue for senior, for an upperclassman minimum, but senior is, and part of the thing is, so we hear from, not that they're not good reps, but we hear from different students, and we give that opportunity to as many students as possible. With 1-year terms does that. So.
President Hardy?
Mr. Burgess.
I hear what Mr. Doran's saying, and I would suggest that the Regional Student Council would be the appropriate body to determine how long the term might be, and I do think that 1-year terms are reasonable. I also think there's advantage because of the hearing multiple voices. That's a really good point. But I think there's also advantages to having a student on the board for more than 1 year, because just like all of us, they need to learn how to be a board member. So having that option, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. Also, if we have trouble identifying, or if we're not always getting student reps, which I'm not. I think Mr. Doran spoke to that earlier, that sometimes it's been, in the past, it's been hard or difficult to find a representative. Tell me if I'm misunderstanding, but if that is the case, I think that, opening it up to a broader age range may help with that issue, because you have a bigger pool to pull from. I would essentially say that yeah, it's not necessarily our job to be prescriptive on the age or the term, the period for the student representative. I would think that should come from the body that appoints that representative.
Mr. Doran.
Okay. I want to clarify that when there was difficulty getting a student advisory member seated, it was not for lack of candidates. It was organizationally, and it was a transition in supervisors, and one not knowing, actually, that new supervisor didn't realize it at the time, and it had fallen through the cracks. So it wasn't like, there is lots and lots of kids, actually. Generally, my experience has been, there have been several candidates vying for it, and that's another reason why one-year terms makes a lot of sense, because it's a real plum for kids and real interest. And I also have an insight in that we had a daughter who was in that position long ago, but watching them over the years, they're really, really good, and we've never had a shortage of interest. So just to clarify that point.
Thank you for that clarification.
Ms. Sanderson.
Just a quick comment. I just think that we want to make sure we have a student rep. We want them actually on the cover of the new journal that we receive. That's what it's talking about, having students' voices heard. We want to make sure that we make room for our students so that they're vital. They meet, last year, 300 of them met for 3.5 days, 4 days. And they have their own bylaws, and, they function. And this past year, our student reps spoke very candidly, eloquently, and pointedly to governing bodies of our state, and they totally ignored those young leaders who will probably be taking their place here soon. So, yes, we just want to make sure we have room for them.
I think we're okay to move on.
Okay, thank you. The next one is on page 11. It's policy 9123. It was flagged to review and discuss. I have clerk budget committee responsibility, but I'm wondering if that was actually a treasurer was the conversation, so I apologize for that. But the discussion was whether or not we wanted to add that duty to the treasurer and put that in policy. So do we want to hold this policy while we have the overall committee conversation and committee-specific policy, or can we do this now?
The committee in which we're talking about the treasurer being on isn't actually a board committee, it's a borough committee. And so I think we can have it separate from this, and it wasn't officially in policy prior to this that says that they are a member of that committee. But Ms. Marati, who has held that for the last 6 years now, felt very strongly, and has been the one attending it, that should be captured in our policies. Mr. Doran?
Yeah, I think with that clarification, because it is covered then under treasurer number 1, that's the borough, which should be capital, well, I don't know, that's the borough audit committee. And so, yeah, that's what I thought it was, so thanks for that clarification.
So this policy is good to go? Okay.
This one, Mr. Doran? Hold on. Was there something else, Mr. Doran?
Okay. It was just a thought, is there any reason not to separate them?
You mean treasurer and clerk?
Right.
No, we went by this model because ASB did not have clerk, I believe, so we just put ours together on this policy.
Right, okay. And I believe under the conversation that we had in this committee, this subcommittee group, that work group, for ASB, they do kind of lump them because of several of the rural districts. It's one person who does them both, whereas for us, we're very clear that we have separate positions. I know it's and then we break it out, but it might be worth it if it's not problematic to just separate it. It suits our board better.
Yep, I think that would look like making, it would be a new number, so we'll just have to, I'll look at that. It would probably be something like a 923.1, because 9124 is taken.
Right, yeah, I looked at that and I said, oh, wait a minute. And I think 9122 is also, might be, but anyway, yeah.
Okay, I will look at
I
that.
think that suits us better, and that's why AASB has just kind of lumped theirs, because most of their districts.
Okay. Just gonna make notes real quick. Okay, next one is page 13, and this is for attorney. And there was a lot of discussion about this policy at the second work session. We did end up accepting the ASB model policy on this. And then the discussion was to add administrative regulation to capture who to call when, basically between the borough attorney and the private attorney. And so we added the attorney list that Dr. Meinert provided with that information. Yes, it is. It's added as a new AR, so it's going to be on page 14.
Question.
Mr. Burgess.
The policy seems to be in conflict with itself, and maybe there's some clarification, but when it says the board president with board consensus is the primary contact with the private attorney, but then the next paragraph is the superintendent may confer with the district's legal counsel at their discretion. Those sentences seem to be in conflict with one another.
I think one is applying to board members, and then one is a statement. The superintendent, given, if you look at the AR, all the things that they might need to get legal counsel on, is able to do that in service of the district's needs. The other part is who is able to contact an attorney that is a board member. So individual board members can contact the borough attorney, that is free. The board president, with board consensus, can contact the private attorney, and then in extenuating circumstances, if the board president is the area of concern, then a superintendent or vice president may make contact, meaning about the board president. And currently, our policy says that only the board president is the one who should be contacting an attorney, and then the attorney needs to give, or I'm not even sure if it's board policy, because our policies weren't great either, but that the attorney should confer with the president on whether or not a board member can talk to that private attorney.
Okay. That's a helpful clarification, and I don't think it's necessarily clear in this language. It may be something that we need to think on, but I would think that a couple words added to the second paragraph of this section could help clarify that we're talking about in that paragraph specifically board members, but that the superintendent is able to confer. And I could, at a later time suggest some language. I'm not ready to at this moment.
Mr. Doran, did you, and then Ms. Maple?
Just because it's most relevant to Mr. Burgess's comment, I was just adding in that second paragraph, is the primary contact with a private attorney regarding board matters. That might help clarify that, and then that might, and Mr. Burgess can think about that and see whether that helps clarify your concern. Question I had is in terms of that first sentence there in the second, individual board members may contact the borough attorney. And one question I have is, we do not get billed at all from the borough attorney, or we sometimes do?
Currently, we do not get billed for time with the borough attorney.
Okay, because sometimes that's very, so
Sometimes.
my question there is more about who, when, and what prevails. Because it's actually been referenced that sometimes people will go and you go to the attorney that will give you the answer that you want. I would go to the attorney that goes, give me the answer I want. But if we, and I'm going to link it with the AR, and the general question, we can come back to that later, is that does reflect the memo of understanding we have, that we checked, that does cover that memo, that we have an understanding of what things the borough attorney addresses, what things our private attorney addresses, and that understanding that's been hammered out. But I am a little concerned about that general piece. And yes, there are things that, talked to Jill about, she does a good OMA. In general, AASB provides good training on OMA, specifically to school boards and districts. But that's the question that I have is, okay, if we have a dynamic, we could have two different opinions, and we have. And we've also had where I really, really appreciate both the borough attorney and our private attorney, that they've said this is something you might want to consider, and have sometimes referred to the other attorney and said, get a legal opinion, which is very, very appropriate, and I like the balance that they've been working on, and we have a currently good relationship in that. But there.
Ms. Maple.
I was just going to say that last sentence adds confusion, but does it add confusion because it's not actually relevant here? Because we're talking about the school board and how.
So my other understanding of this is that technically the superintendent cannot employ their own attorney. It is the school board is the one employing the attorney, and we are allowing the superintendent to use it because at one point in time, we did not have a private attorney. Ms. Dolan sat in our boardroom and acted as our attorney in our board meetings, and then they couldn't hire enough legal to support the borough's needs. So that was when Ms. Dolan brought our current attorney to us and said, this is somebody you should consider. I can't handle this anymore. And that was where all of this came out of, and there was an memorandum of understanding or something. And so this is old but newer territory, and it is the board that employs the attorney, but it is a vital needed thing for Dr. Meinert to have access and the ability to contact that attorney for the needs of the district.
President Hardy?
Mr. Burgess.
So on reviewing that point, when it, maybe one helpful clarification here would be for that first paragraph, we keep it as is and move that final sentence of this section, the superintendent may confer with the district's legal counsel, to the end of the first paragraph. And then that brings all the superintendent related stuff to that first paragraph. Second paragraph, add Mr. Dorn's suggestion to the beginning of that sentence, and then I think that should help to clarify this.
I support those changes, and I've been ruminating on that first line because it has continuously gotten us in sticky situations. But I do know, in talking with Ms. Dolan, that Ms. Dolan has clearly stated, like, if a board member calls, she's going to talk to them, and we're not going to change that. So if we want a big change in behavior, it's going to be on us to change that behavior. So perhaps something like individual board members may contact the borough attorney, but should make every effort to discuss the matter with the board president prior to making contact, so that we don't end up with two differing legal opinions. And it doesn't mean that you can't, Ms. Dolan will take your phone call. She's made that clear. But we don't want to keep ending up with differing legal opinions, and having that discussion with your board president means that perhaps the president will make that choice to talk to the borough attorney, and then there's only one piece. Or maybe they've already contacted and gotten information from, our actual private attorney, and now we've created a mess for ourselves. So we need to clarify our expectations. Is that a hand, Ms. Anderson?
Yeah, that fact is very important, considering when board members are contacting the borough's attorney, and then at a meeting, something is presented, president is unaware of it, and the president now has to, not only, govern the meeting that we're in, but now taken by surprise, something that has been in conversation and not been privy to. So this is very important about who, and, the comment I've heard in the past was that members were contacting the borough's attorney for such frequency that they were thinking like, well, maybe we should start charging, or, so it was just interesting. So this is good points to clarify this.
Dr. Minor?
I would definitely support some language that tightened up the tiebreaker vote that Mr. Doran was talking about. And, if if individual board members were contacting the borough attorney, that they would consult with the board president, but also that we would use the guidelines set out in AR. And if it's under one of those specific headings, that's the tiebreaker vote. Because at the end of the day, that's the attorney that will be representing the district in potential future litigation. And in my opinion, it would be important to follow that advice on the front end rather than following potential different advice and, getting ourselves into a situation. So some language around strengthening following what's under these sections. And these are current. I've had a couple conversations with the borough this year, and their workload, their potential to expand outside of this. They're currently still experiencing some staffing challenges, and so this is current, and this is what they're comfortable with providing us at this time.
To that end, could we add in, because I'm seeing you're making live changes, individual board members may contact the borough attorney after consulting with the board president and in keeping in line with AR 9124, because then that says you need to check this to know if that is the appropriate attorney you should be contacting. Mr. Doran?
I like the direction we're going in terms of tightening it up. And President Hardy, as you said in your earlier comments too, I think kind of capturing that. The couple of things that occur to me, and I like Mr. Burgess's comment about moving that last line up. So, but I'm thinking that really the board president is the primary contact with both borough and private. Private becomes a bigger issue because if I pick up the phone as board member Tim and call our private attorney, the dollars start clicking. And that shouldn't be. The thing that crosses my mind, and so one of the things I would strike with board consensus in that paragraph, because there are times when the president needs to get a legal clarification immediately, perhaps even before it comes to a meeting, hopefully, so you don't have to take time out, but sometimes it comes up, so that they don't need a consensus of the board. They don't need a majority of the board. If they need legal advice for our board, then they should be able to get that, and we should be able to trust them. The other piece with it is, in terms as a board member, I like the idea of referencing the guidelines in the AR. Basically, except for the very last bullet, assignments by the school board, we would not be doing very much of that. We should. But I think to the borough attorney's point is that there are times, perhaps as a public official, we're under the municipality, that yes, it is an understanding of my role as a public official, not my going to get a decision on how the board should act. I think there's a real distinction. If I've got a concern about how the board is acting, I should bring that up to the board. Not going to an attorney and then to the board. I should bring it up as this is something that we need to get, if we need clarification or whatever. But if it is something that affects my role as a public official, you know, a generic that if you know, did I put my APOC officially, did I get it in time? Did I, oh, I missed the deadline, what can I do? Those types of things, maybe some understanding of that broad OMA. But the, this attorney distinction in the AR goes way back from before that, that memo was done. As long as I've been to the district, and then it was before that, we primarily used the borough attorney. The district always had another attorney, also based out of Anchorage, that they used as a private attorney for general consulting, and then sometime, you know, on issues that came up with SPED or, you know, some other different things that would come up. So they've always had that. But over time, school law has become much more complicated, and caseload has, or the case decisions have increased over time. So having somebody who's really well versed in that has really led us to our currency, as well as what the borough attorney can handle, and they don't have that background in school law, that expertise. Working over, this was several years ago when that was put together to really try and say, you know, it was done the previous administration, both the borough attorney, private attorney, and to kind of hammer out an understanding so they weren't stepping on each other's toes. So that's just a little bit of that history, but it's always been there. It's evolved as it should organizationally, and I think we're able to meet both our needs, the borough needs, as well as the breadth and depth of school law support that we have.
Madam President,
Mr. Burgess.
changing it up a little bit. That time, I just wanted to speak in support of Dr. Meinert's comments about, you know, if we do get multiple conflicting legal opinions, that the private attorney, the private attorney's opinion should prevail. I would, is that?
It was that we use it as a tiebreaker for whether or not it falls under borough legal or the private attorney legal in that AR. That's the tiebreaker. Who owns that subject?
Okay, all right. Apologies. I wanted to support Mr. Doran's comments as well. I would support striking with board consensus, and because I agree that sometimes the president doesn't have time to seek that consensus, or there may be other reasons that an opinion is needed without the consensus of the board. So I strongly support striking that, and I also agree that maybe there should be a distinction between board matters that affect the whole board and district versus advice for an individual board member in discharging their own duties. Because I do believe it is appropriate for individual board members to seek advice on those kinds of matters, you know, as Mr. Doran was saying. And so I just wanted to throw my support behind those comments as well.
So I think hearing the feedback, it would sound like this. We did move up the superintendent sentence to the first paragraph. What if we started with that second sentence? The board president is the primary contact with the private attorney and borough attorney regarding board matters, Individual board members may contact the borough attorney after consulting with the board president and in keeping in line with the administrative regulation. So moving that one sentence to the first, and then in extenuating circumstances when the board president is the area of concern, the superintendent or vice president may make contact.
President Hardy.
Mr. Burgess.
I would ask or suggest that if a board member is consulting with the borough attorney on an individual matter of, discharging our own duties, that we would not need consent from the board president, because that's not an issue for the whole board. So if we make that distinction that, that an individual member can contact the borough attorney for advice on discharging their own duties, maybe there's a couple other clauses in there too, Open Meetings Act or APOC or whatever. If it's about an individual board member's duty, I don't think we should be required to go through the board president to get that advice. So I would suggest that we strike that as well. But only if we have that clarification that it's for individual duties, not matters affecting the whole board or the entire district.
So Ms. Dillard has added board members may contact the borough attorney for advice on the discharge of their own duties. And then that could almost be its own thing. And then board members, after consulting with the board president and keeping it in line, or further board member contact of the borough attorney should only be, I'm on the fly, however you want to say that, after consulting with the board president. And then I had two things to clean up. Can we take that line about the board president is the primary contact for the private attorney, borough attorney regarding all board matters, and put that in the president's duties on AR or board bylaw 9121, the duties of the president, so that it's in both places?
Both places.
Yeah, so it's
Okay.
here, and then it's also here. And then can we, because in reading through our AR, what I don't think is explicitly clear is who handles things like Open Meetings Act and who handles things like APOC or those other things. So if we're saying this is where we should go to find that information, it should be there. And to Mr. Doran's really good point that our private attorney is, in school law is the expert. That's their wheelhouse. Our borough attorney is the Open Meetings Act expert. That's what they run all day long with the assembly. So perhaps that is, when we're talking about Robert's rules and open meetings thing, who we should be leaning on. And then our late night board meetings, when we're asking a Robert's rule question, we're calling up our borough attorney anyways. We're very seldom trying to reach CDOR in late hours of the night. Mr. Doran.
A couple of things. One, I would, in discharge of own duties as a public official, yes, it may be different than as a school board member. I would not get into Open Meetings Act and those things there. We have two different perspectives, lenses on it, and from two different attorneys. The borough does not use Robert's rules. That's not to say they are not a wonderful resource, the borough attorney, whoever that might be. But I do think in terms of its board matters, I am looking at the president and, and whoever that would be. We have three of us sitting here who have sat in that seat at any given times. That, there is case law on school board OMA, and it's developing. And so that may be a player in who you call. We have had the private attorney on late at night because of issues. We, you know, with the borough attorney, also, we've had the borough attorney who's accepted a call late at night. So again, I think it's what the nature of the information is, who, and that may be at a given time, the president kind of looking and saying, okay, is this more a school thing with, you know, who can give us the best information at this, especially if it's a short notice type of thing. Fortunately, we don't very often call any attorney in the middle of a meeting late at night. We've got time to touch base with them. I think just being mindful of that without having to put everything in, understanding that there are different lenses to look at things. And I've appreciated both attorneys, having worked with both of them personally, have sometimes offered their lens and have said, you might want to check the other lens. I think we've come a long way in working together and the attorneys working together. And sometimes the two of them calling each other and hammering it out and saying so that they're not giving us, you know, they try to avoid giving us conflicting advice. So I wouldn't get too bogged down in specifics, but there are differences in the lens that I would expect the president and the board, if they, you know, a board member has a question on it, they can voice that to the president, you know, get, so.
So I don't think I heard any specific additions to the administrative regulation, but am I wrong?
I think that's fine for right now.
Okay,
And
I know
ARs
there's the-
can be changed without board, so, although they have
Okay.
to come before the board is part of our new policy. So, yeah.
Okay, and I'll wordsmith this paragraph. I just wanted to make sure that I was understanding what I was hearing. So when we set, so we're saying that individual board members can ask advice on the discharge of their own duties as a public official. Further board member contact on board matters. Is that the intent of that next piece? Would it be board matters? Is that what you were saying?
What if we took out further and just board member contact on board matters
Okay.
shall only be made after consulting with the board president and in keeping in line with administrative regulations? And shall is prescriptive, which means don't be doing it.
Okay, thank you so much. I am moving us to page 15, which is board committees, and we're going to set that aside, actually, so never mind. Let us skip to 21. Page 21 is remuneration, reimbursement, and other benefits. This was a policy that I believe everybody was pretty happy with when we worked through it at that work session in January. However, we wanted to bring it back, is my understanding, just to make sure.
It had to do with health insurance benefits, and that currently board members do not pay, but there was discussion and we didn't have everybody here on whether or not that it should come down to board members paying just like employees. So that was the health and welfare benefits. And a memo that was sent out to us that will eventually be presented, it's not next meeting, or is it?
It is on the 16th.
Okay, on the 16th, the Enrollments and Salaries Commission for the borough sent us that memo that everyone had. And in there, they talk about both our stipend, but then also still maintaining health and welfare benefits, but their memo does say paying the same as the employees. So that's there, but it's still our choice as board members. Ms. Maple?
I support, as a recipient of healthcare, I support that I should be paying the same as any employee. And I would like to see that change, because I know that the reason that it is as it is written as it was is because that used to be what our employees received as well. So I think ours should change.
Ms. Dillard?
I would just like to add, since I personally spoke to how inexpensive my insurance was at that meeting when we were discussing this, it is fair to say that your employee contribution could change drastically in the future. and your stipends aren't a lot. So I just wanted to put that out there since I advocated for how inexpensive my insurance was.
I think there's only one other board member who actually used this, but we are writing it for future boards. But I think the general will of the board seems to be that we want that to change, so I don't think it needs to be brought up as its own separate. And we'll make sure that we inform the board members who aren't here in case they feel differently.
Yeah, and I assume, sorry, board members would be informed of the costs before they get to choose, before they make the choice, right? So I think that's fine.
Mr. Doran.
I appreciate this clarification. I wasn't at your last meeting to where this is, but I had always assumed that, I mean, I knew board members could participate in the health benefits. I always assumed it was on the same plan, and but yes, at one time, employees did not pay into it, but that's a long, long time ago. And I assumed that the intent of the previous boards was whatever the plan is, that's the plan which includes the sharing costs. So this clarification, I think, is in the intent of even the original boards.
Dr. Minert.
And I think, if agreeable with the board, my recommendation would be that this would go into effect January 1st, 2025, during the open enrollment period, so that anybody that wanted or needed to make a change could do so with the understanding of what those costs would be going forward.
Ms. Sanderson.
What are other boards across the state doing along this lines? The compensation for serving, by the time you make your rounds with visiting schools, so forth and so on, gas prices have gone through the roof. You take somebody out for coffee, pretty much that shoots the stipend. So the insurance was a nice compensation. But I was just curious what other boards are doing.
We can definitely seek that through ASB. I know Anchorage makes considerably more than we do, like considerably more. I know some boards are volunteer and receive nothing. And the memo that was sent, their recommendation was that we increase our salary to $1,150 for all board members and $1,300 for the president. So currently our stipends are $800 for board members and $1,000 for the board president. I know some people might think we get paid a lot more than that, but we don't.
Just the insurance is just where my head is right now, not here, but somewhere else. Yeah, the insurance comes into play.
It is, and it is an equal playing field. I see you, Mr. Doran. It allows a lot of members, I have heard in the past. I personally don't use it. I have TRICARE, so I am very privileged in that respect. But it allows this board service to be more accessible to more people because insurance is hard to get in America. Mr. Doran.
I believe the first sentence on the health benefits is what has been around. And so when we really say provided the same program provided for district employees, that's whatever they get. So it is a co-pay. I think there are, for instance, the Assembly used to give health benefits. We both used to participate in the retirement program that went away a long time ago, and and they dropped the health benefit for Assembly a long time ago. So it's been one of those things that has been moved out. I think being able to offer it as an option is certainly a really big thing. But if it's the district plan, that's what it is, and whatever you share those costs. So, but I firmly agree. Wait until I make this so no one's caught in a bind. They know they can do it would be effective.
Thank you. The next one is 9270, conflict of interest. I believe there weren't a lot of questions or comments to this policy. There was just a lot of work, I think, to the administrative regulation. We did add, so 9270 is our policy 240, and then we added ASB's model policy as an administrative regulation. And so I think we just wanted to ensure that everybody was happy with the way that that looked, and I don't know of any other specific questions to it.
Mr. Doran?
Okay. The only question I had regarding the conflict of interest is, we recently had a rewrite of our board policy with close legal, and does this capture our recent policy well enough? I'm sorry I didn't get to go see it before this meeting, but
Which policy?
the one on conflict of interest. But we redid that with John Cedar and his firm not that long ago.
Yeah, 2021 it looks like.
Yeah, that is the policy 240, was last updated in September 2021, and that is our policy language in this ASB
Okay.
9270.
Great, thank you. That's all, because I knew we spent a lot of time on that, and making sure it was up to date and address some of the issues that had come up locally for us.
Okay. I'm expecting in-depth conversation. Okay, so moving on to page 26 is 9271 Code of Ethics. And this was a policy that I think was pretty much finalized. President Hardy also, I brought it in because of that ASB report that we received from Ms. Timmy. And so I don't know that we need to.
Yeah, this one I think was good. This, it's the same number, but it's anchorages. And I had sent it out to the board early in my tenure of saying, hey, I think we need to do policies along the same as, I had sent it to Ms. Sanderson last year. Like, we need to work on this. And then she started this train rolling. I still think we need to come up with something for this. It's kind of like cliff notes to your chapter 9s, but I don't think it needs to hold up this. When we get all of these passed, then it can be the work of someone to pull the highlighted main points and create something like this to help future board members. But I don't think it's needs to be done tonight.
I can help with your cliff notes in the future.
Yay.
Okay,
Mr. Doran?
Sorry, just a couple of things, but I agree. Okay, the cliff notes are very long, and yeah, we'll deal with that later. So that's great to me. But in terms of 9271, the employees section just is awkward wording. That school member actions may affect the capability of district employees to practice their trade or profession and should encourage their increasing competence and professional growth. It just, yes, our actions may do, you know, I'm thinking it's really board members' actions should encourage district employees' increased competence and professional growth. It seems to mix, it's just awkward. Technically, it's probably okay, but it's awkward and kind of goes back, who's the there? Is it the board members or is it the employees? So I would suggest rewording that. So basically I took effect that board members' actions should encourage district employees' increased increasing competence and professional growth.
And leave it at that and take out the middle there, take out the may affect the capability of district employees to practice their trade and profession.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then,
I would tend to agree with that. The current wording is pretty confusing. I think there are other potential fixes there, but I think that the statement that board members' actions may affect the capability of district employees to practice their trade is a given. I don't think it necessarily needs to be stated there. So I would support that change.
and I have one more.
Mr. Doran?
Under laws and policies, it's one of basically, again, a wording, constitutions of Alaska and the United States, kind of awkward to say state and nation when we know specifically who they are. And then just a generic comment, having the code of ethics in here, I think is a good idea, and just it doesn't need to be in here, should not be in here, but I think our board norms that encouraging that continued process, that we look at those and we affirm them perhaps on an annual basis or whatever, even if they don't change, but they can be separate.
Ms. Dillard?
We could add those in as an exhibit, similar, like ASB has the exhibits, like we have appendix and board docs, so we could add it as an exhibit and change it out as those change annually.
Could be.
Yeah.
Cool, because I think that has been a wonderful process, and it's aside from ethics, so.
President Hardy?
Mr. Burgess?
Under the laws and policies, I strongly support the wording that's there. Maybe it's not the right place for it, I don't know, but I'm wondering if we could, I just want to make sure that my concern is that if you identify a deficiency in your knowledge, it's not always clear how you fix that. So what I'm wondering is if there's a way that we can clarify what actions a school board member might take if they recognize or how they might go about filling their knowledge gaps once they realize that that they don't understand a certain law or something like that. I know we have the ability to go to AASB as long as we're a member of them. That shouldn't be written in policy, but some way to point out how and maybe this shouldn't be in policy at all, but I feel like somewhere we need to help board members to seek out knowledge when they know that they lack it.
I hear what you're saying, and I agree. I feel like we covered that when we're talking about roles and responsibilities of board members, and we talked about how you are supposed to be continually learning and go to ASB, and that's a priority.
Mm-hmm.
But as elected officials, whether or not we understand the law, we are bound by the law. Like, ignorance is not a excuse in court. You break a law even if you didn't realize it was. Did I miss the point?
Yeah, I'm not saying that ignorance would be an excuse. I just, it's a training thing, right? So maybe you're right. Maybe it's covered adequately in other areas, and that's fine. I just want to make, it's being a supervisor in my job and also having been someone who's been supervised. Sometimes you got to ask for help when you realize that you don't know something, and so just want to make sure that And I think we probably do a reasonable job. I think maybe also it can be part of the onboarding discussion, because it's just really important that board members feel that they have somewhere to turn when they feel like something's missing. So yeah, we're probably fine though.
What if instead of under laws and policies, we either put it at the top or the bottom that talks about, board members? Because I think it could belong in a code of ethics. I don't think it belongs just under laws and policies. So, we have at the very last paragraph is devote sufficient time, thought, and study to proposed actions to be able to base decisions upon all available facts and vote in accordance with honest convictions, unswayed by partisan bias of any kind. Somewhere in there, we could say a continual commitment to learning and growth, somewhere around there. Mr. Doran, did you have a thought on that?
Go ahead. and I'll
Okay.
chime in.
Help me wordsmith, guys. Through board service, board members make a continual commitment to professional learning and growth in order for them to, something about discharge their duties, or I don't know. Help me, guys. Mr. Doran?
So a thought is, and I'm fine with this. We identify all the groups except to the board. And the last paragraph is part of that decision-making piece. But it might be that we should have a heading regarding board members. Because we have that response, and then what you're putting in there just reinforces that commitment is part of our, we will work with each other and help each other and do those things.
Also, could it just, through board service, board members make a commitment to professional development? Does it have to actually be any more specific? Okay.
Anderson?
I was just thinking about the AASB webinars and the newsletter. I mean, there are so many ways to grow. So I was just thinking about that, those
What
two
if-
things.
Yeah, we do what Mr. Doran said and make a heading of the board. So we have commitments to students, community, employees, individuals, laws and policies. So maybe before decision-making, the board, and that reaffirms, especially because we talk about board norms, then we can take that piece. So each school board member through board service makes a commitment to professional development, and then whatever else we want to add in there. Mr. Doran?
I really like this, and thinking that besides the professional development, which is one thing, and there's so many different ways people will pick up, not specifying them, but just as an ethic, that you are to that growth. But I'm just thinking of a learning together, because there's the professional development, but it's a learning from each other that's also part of, I think, our ethics too. So
I would love for it to say something along teamwork, or I think that's something that has set this board apart, is that we have worked together as a team and we see ourselves as part of an organization and not separate entities working towards individual goals. That's why we work well together. We are a team. So teamwork towards the collective betterment, like I said, I think of myself as a coach. I don't know the best way to say it, but if we're setting aspirational goals in the code of ethics, that's where I'd like to see it go.
But if we
Go ahead, Mr. Ernst.
makes a commitment to teamwork, learning together, and ongoing professional development.
Yeah, I like that.
Last thing I had on this section
Mr. Doran.
was just a formatting that we move everything over to the left. So students are, kind of stand out to the side, and then everything else is
Yes,
indented.
thank you.
We can
Yep.
just get those
Done.
all in line.
Well, yeah, yes, that's fine. I think it was a decision to distinguish that because then there's the, yeah. But it doesn't look good, so we'll change it.
Formatting wise too, I think there's extra spaces.
Oh, okay, I missed that. So then I would move that, I still think if it's all in line is good. But if we want that line, school members also have other major commitments to, I would separate that from students. But I don't think it's necessary. These are all the groups and students are first.
What if we, instead of just saying students, say student-focused governance?
I like it's the body of, it's the people.
Okay.
I like the simplicity of it, to tell you the truth. and the other line that I really, really like is the second one in the first paragraph. Every board member has something to add to the work of the board and represents viewpoints of the community. And as I was looking at that, I was thinking, oh, often I point out things that should be changed. I really like that sentence. Don't change it.
Your group worked hard on that sentence, I remember. Do we like it like this? So I just separated that one sentence and kept, okay. Moving on, page 28, school board policies, which is policy 9311. And I actually put this one in here because I just wanted to show the policy review cycle. So we're looking way into the administrative regulation actually that's attached. So it's the AR 9311. And this is the review cycle that I put in there. It doesn't match ASB policy. So I just wanted to make sure that you were okay with it. We don't have an Article 8. What ASB presented in their model policy didn't really work. So if we're good with that, that would be starting fresh next year, considering at this point we're reviewing all policies. So all of that's done.
Mr. Doran.
Only question in this area I had is, we have in practice, and it was referenced actually earlier in this meeting too, we've done a report on policies that are upcoming policies, and then we've done first reading and second reading, but we don't say that about the report. Should we? It's a practice we have followed, not all necessarily everybody follows that, but that's one we have followed, and I think it's been pretty good.
I know what you're referencing, and I know it's in the policies. I'm just trying to remember which policy it's in if it's not here, because where it shows the first reading, it might be agenda.
Okay. Well, it does in this one, it talks about the procedure and has first, they call it.
Oh, yes.
We're calling it first meeting rather than first reading. I would suggest it could be first reading and second reading, but if the first step is to present it as a report, and then first reading and second reading.
So I'm hearing number one would be the report to the board.
I think that practice has served us really well. And
I think it is in somewhere else, but it's okay. Well, it's good to put it here. And then if I come across it later, I'll reconcile, make sure it's the same. So number one would be a report to the board, and then number two would be not first meeting, we are calling it a first reading. And then number two would also be second reading. I actually think we're gonna get to a question of what that report is supposed to look like, because that was one of the things that we discussed. So I think it is in here, and it might even be committees. Was there anything else?
Thirty-two, move on. Oh, did you have more, Mr. Doran?
I just wanted, because it's highlighted the policy review cycle, I think that's great. We should have that, so.
Can I make one note about that? I'd like to have, I guess, more discussion internally about that review cycle. Currently, our review cycle is listed under 286, and I don't want to be too ambitious in terms of the review of an entire chapter for the board. Like, because we're moving to AASB's policy manual, it's condensed a lot of policies into fewer chapters, and so thinking the board is going to potentially go through more when we haven't even really kept up pace to this point in time, I think sets us up for failure. So I'd like to take a look at that and see what might be a reasonable pace for the board to review. And then, of course, the board, if there's certain policies at any time, can bring that up and we can go through those individual policies.
And that's AR, so you could definitely change that and then just bring it back to us, and I'm sure we'll be with you. Mr. Doran.
And I think just along with that, I see no problem. I think that's a good thing, and the understanding, because we really have gotten off cycle since the pandemic. We haven't gotten back on, so we're pushing 5 years. And after doing this whole thing, we'll sort of start us off with ground zero. It's kind of nice. But just to make sure, and it doesn't mean that the whole policy comes forward. It's, I think in practice, when we had a real good the administration would take a look at it, each section, and there might be nothing to update or bring forward. Other times there's, several within it, but just those small policies that not the whole chapter would have to. But I'm just saying yes, and getting us back on track is the main thing, more than when I pointed that out, is I'm not committed to that it has to be done in 4 years. If it's 5 years, it's 6 years, but that we do a regular review.
Okay, thank you. So page 32 is meetings 9320. And I think this policy, nope, sorry, I'm sorry, where am I?
Page 32.
Page 32. Meetings. Yes, okay. I need stapled, I need these stapled. Okay, yes, page 32, meetings. This was flagged for review and approval, and I believe that this was mainly just because there are a lot of additions and changes to this policy and making sure that it's encompassing everything that we want it to. At the original work session, this was mostly our language that replaced all of the ASB model policy. It was 261, 262.2, 263, and 264.
It was also around the video and teleconference things and participation. I do want to flag notice of meetings has the paragraph written twice. They're slightly different, but they're kind of the same thing.
intent.
Okay, thank you.
That top paragraph is our language.
This, the two that are the same? Okay.
That's our existing 262.1.
Mr. Doran?
Just on that, as we're looking at it, is, yeah, there's a lot of redundancy there that could be eliminated. But I think just to be aware, and I don't know whether it's elsewhere, there is a distinction, maybe it's in our current policy, for making sure board members know as well as the public notice. We've operated that both go out at the same time effectively, but I think that's why because one really talks about notifying the board members, the other is the public, and we've really done them the same. So I agree, if we can combine them is good.
Ms. Maple?
I think the main thing that I was concerned about is not in here anymore was like a hard limit on how often somebody could participate via teleconference, and it's very clearly now stated like that it's a flexibility and it won't be abused, and we have to make sure that if we're doing it that we're actually audible. I mean, I think that this is really comprehensive and accomplishes the goal here.
Number 2, I think takes away from that goal that says authorization will only be granted for unusual and extenuating circumstances that preclude the member's in-person attendance. And we had a whole discussion during that retreat about how there is a board member at another place in Alaska who participates almost solely because they're a homebound board member, and that they offer a lot to that board. And I think the intent of a lot of the board members was that this become more flexible, that we're in a modern world and workplace. And so not being physically here, I mean, Mr. Burgess is a prime example, does not preclude you from doing the work of the board as long as you're fully doing it and participating. I don't think it has to be granted for unusual and extenuating circumstances.
So could we change it? Sorry.
Ms. Maple?
Authorization will be granted for circumstances that preclude the members' in-person attendance. So removing only and unusual and extenuating.
I think that's good. I also think adding in there childcare clearly, makes this so this is a family-friendly board, and sometimes packing up your children when you don't, for me, sometimes finding a babysitter is really hard. I've managed to do it every single time, and as the president, I'm going to be here in person. But that doesn't mean that you can't be home while your children are sleeping and still participating. Yeah. Mr. Doran?
Acknowledging that technology has changed, and when we first wrote our thing, it was actually we were on the phone, and we didn't have any video. And I think this has been helpful and has shown its usefulness to the board to have more participation, even if someone is traveling. I am a little concerned, but you're already raising those issues, of questions that have come up to the board. I'm thinking particularly Anchorage faced this a few years ago, number of years, I forget, I don't know exactly how long ago, but they had a board member who was deploying to Korea, I believe it was. But anyway, they were out of the country and going to be there. What does that mean? And they you know, the decision was that, no, they're out of the community. It's important to know what's going on in the schools. That was their decision at that time. We've had the question of my work location changes. And I am consistently not at board meetings for that. There are broader, you know, and can I live with this and see how it plays out? Because, you know, we do have elsewhere in terms of attendance and contributing to the board. I mean, we can always raise the question. It does state in several places that it's not meant to regularly replace in-person participation, but to recognize that on occasion, the teleconference option, and I think that needs to be an important focus for us. Situations come up and we can say, does it affect our operation as a board or whatever, but I think those are questions that we're going to continue to need to look at within this thing. I do have a real concern where we say that we might not have a meeting because everyone's on Zoom, or we won't have it in person. And what does that mean for people coming who want to give testimony? We did that under emergency and during pandemic, but is that what we want as normal operation? So,
Dr. Minor, then Ms. Maple.
I could defer to Ms. Maple if you want to. Do you want to speak first? Okay. I remember we had a fair amount of conversation around this at the work session with AASB, and part of this, I think, is an efficiency part where if you don't have the majority of the members local, switching to video conference actually makes it more efficient to conduct the meeting. I think there was also concern if, you know, there's only one or two board members present physically, you know, in the chambers, and it's a contentious topic that, you know, it might be better that it's either one medium or the other. And this gives that tipping point where if for whatever reason the majority of the board isn't going to be present physically, that could then tip the meeting over virtually. As far as administering the meeting, you know, I don't know that we would have any issues continuing to provide public testimony and for people to do that remotely. We've continued to do that here, having the board here so we could switch that remotely if that circumstance came to be. So just wanted to provide some context.
Ms. Maple.
Perhaps adding, so that number 8, perhaps adding clarification that something along the lines of, you know, under the extenuating circumstance that a majority of the board will be participating virtually, just to protect from what Mr. Doran said, that this isn't what we expect to be our new board norm. But that we want to, if that is something that's going to happen, as you said, like if there's only 2 people here and 5 are on Zoom, it is harder at that point to do a hybrid meeting than to just put everybody on Zoom. So maybe making it clear in number 8 that this is an extenuating circumstance thing, not a norm. And then I was just going to say, to speak to some of the other things that Mr. Doran said, I think number 9 does a good job at I mean, that last sentence, that if they're not able to display meaningful participation, that it is not sustainable. And that could be for whatever reason. Meaningful participation could be because you no longer live in the community and you don't know what's going on in the community. It also could be that you just have your microphone muted and your camera off. And I think that number 9, you know, really gives the board as a whole the discretion to say this is not a sustainable practice for this particular member. Yeah, that's all.
Mr. Doran.
yeah, and I know where one of the areas the AASB comes on this is because a lot of their boards do not live in the same community, and you could have weather would keep them from traveling. So this is, and the cost for those communities. In our case, all of us live in the community. So you're giving me food for thought. I mean, I appreciate the conversation because it gives me food for thought, and an openness to the different aspects of it. But the fact that we all live in our community, we should be able to bring our board together. And so switching to a virtual, yes, I understand the logistical piece of that, but we should be able to have 4. And I know I have sat here when only 3 board members showed up. And that's when the board did put in an attendance policy. But I am very concerned about switching to video for the whole, because we should have that quorum here. I particularly, and I guess just sensitivity, when we say, well, there's contentious issues, that's one that probably should not be. We did it in special circumstance. If it's that contentious, we should be willing to face our community and hear from our community, and I think they expect to be able to see us. And then the other piece, when camera was just mentioned, is that reminder that in actuality, well, I certainly feel strongly that the camera should be on. Now, I do know that technology does not necessarily support that, even from one neighborhood to the next neighborhood in our town. We are really spotty. And if you live a little bit out of town, it can be even more difficult. But that's something that I think is worth finding out what that consideration is. I have heard some conversations in terms of Open Meetings Act that your camera's on. At minimum, when you're speaking, it should be on, and it should be on at all time, that they know you're attending to the meeting, that the public knows that, so that's a consideration.
So my 2 cents, the majority of this board is now young working professionals with kids. They are not retired. They have given public service in order to do this, and it comes at a great cost to their families. And sometimes childcare needs are going to come up. And I think this allows this board to move into the 2024 world where this is the norm. Our assembly participates this way. As far as having a video on, that would be a huge hindrance if I were to take part in this, because our internet, like you said, is in different areas. So where I live out on Farmers Loop, if I were to do that, it immediately crashes Zoom. Dr. Meinert has experienced this, where we've had these meetings. I can download. When you learn about internet, there's ups and downs. That's fine. I can watch their videos. If I turn mine on, it crashes immediately, and we have Starlink and all the rest of it. So yes, Fairbanks isn't a remote rural location, but it also is very different. We're the size of New Jersey, and what you have, in downtown Fairbanks is very different than what you have out at Haystack and other places. We fought forever to just get internet at our home. It is not unusual to live in a place where there is no internet and saying that would preclude board members from using a hotspot without having their video on. It once again limits board service, and I think in order to have a robust participation and people to feel like they can join our board, we need to make it more inclusive and accessible and not less. And then the other piece is, we've been talking a lot about respecting our superintendent, respecting each other, and that our motives, we even have our board norm is assume positive intent. We need to assume that if a board member doesn't just decline attending the meeting, but they are making a good faith effort to be at that meeting and participating via Zoom, that they're doing that they are, like we assume of Mr. Burgess right now, that he is fully involved. And we've all sat up here and spent a whole meeting where we maybe said 2 words. That didn't mean you didn't participate. It meant you were taking it in and you were thinking. And then just the final piece, I could see this summer this becoming necessary in order to get board work done, especially switching to Zoom, because we're scheduling far more things throughout this summer than we've ever done before with our strategic plan, with our policy reviews, with all of that. And a lot of us are going to take our kids on vacations. We're going to go do other things, and having the ability to still meaningfully participate in a work session or some other type of meeting where we're all on Zoom, I think we would still get really good work done. We could review policy without all having to sit around this table together. It makes it accessible for the next generation of board members, where we are no longer living in a world that is not inundated with digital. I mean, how many screens are there in this room? It's a different world. I will get off my soapbox. Mr.
President
Doran.
Hardy?
Oh, wait, Mr. Burgess, then Mr. Doran.
Thank you. So I just want to say I absolutely loathe attending meetings remotely. It complicates things logistically. I very much prefer seeing people face to face. And I also think that it's very important for accessibility and many of the other points that President Hardy raised, that we have the option available to people. And I mean, part of that is getting the work done. Like if we have the opportunity to do a virtual meeting, we can get work done when we might not have been able to if in-person attendance was required. I do support, or I agree with Mr. Doran's concerns about video being on. I actually started with my video off today and have just turned it on because I heard 2 board members have a preference for that. And I do too, actually. I think it is a good idea to have video on when possible, but we've established it is not always possible. There are many reasons that in our town that certain board members would not be able to participate. I've lived in places that didn't have internet at all. I've lived in places that had such slow internet it was barely worth using, and you certainly couldn't stream a live meeting like this with video on. And so I think that it is important that we allow flexibility, but I would also support adding language encouraging videos to be on, encouraging cameras to be on if, or strengthening language if we need to. But yeah, I do think we need to be able to be flexible.
Mr. Doran.
I just want to reaffirm that I think all the points that are being brought up are important, but this is an ongoing conversation. The technology changes. What we use today is different than what we used 3 years ago. What we use today is going to be different in 3 years. So I want to acknowledge that this is a step of an ongoing process, and it doesn't foreclose any, we don't say any specific video teleconferencing process. It's kind of open and for changes that might come. But I also want to say that, yes, inclusion is important, and it has been really, really good that we've been able to have people call in on occasions like tonight, and we've had other meetings, and that people do try and get there. I do want to say that it's 2 things. One, it's not a generational piece or a circumstance in life, because we have retired people who are raising kids. We have young people who have lots of flexibility. We're across the board. So I just want to say this is just for board member use. Possibilities, and I think we need to have the option there, but we stay mindful as it plays out. How does it work for the public? And I don't know, the thought I lost it, so you might be lucky.
Okay. page 36. 9322, agenda meetings, meeting and materials.
Sorry, I had another thing on this section. Just in terms of regular meetings, it's been our practice before canceling a meeting that it's been board action. And, we typically have canceled the meeting. When we do the calendar, we haven't had a meeting the second meeting in December and the first meeting in January. And then, our summer ones are addressed. I'm concerned that I've already stated this, that we canceled the meeting last week. No board action. I'm just putting it out there. It doesn't have to be addressed tonight, but if this is our regular meeting schedule, we'd stick to it, unless we do a calendar change, and we have done that at other times, even for an individual meeting that has come.
So I'll start, and then Dr. Minor can come in there. The meeting was canceled last week due to not having enough on the agenda to justify holding a meeting, and things that could not be pushed up. We asked, can we take things from other agendas and move them up, and they aren't ready, and the things that we had intended didn't get done. So in respect for board members' time, canceling that meeting instead of having us come in and then have to adjourn, it made way more sense to say, all right, if there's nothing for the board to do, we should not need to have that, especially coming off of the tails of 3 very intense days just prior, that put board members through a considerable amount. So I would still be in favor of leaving it to the president and the superintendent to decide whether or not that meeting is necessary. And I think that is having that respect that you elected the president and that they're going to make a few judgment calls. Otherwise, if we're doing official board action, then we're all going to have to come in here for that meeting and then officially cancel the meeting, because it has to be done in public notice, and it just belabors the point. And I think it wastes a lot of people's time and effort, especially people who we would have to pay to be here to do that, through our administration, through Ms. Richardson, through our technology. It seems like a waste of time and resources. Dr. Minor.
I mean, I think you summarized it well. Due to circumstances outside of our control, a couple of the reports that we had hoped to have for that meeting got pushed back, and so truly we only had one agenda item, and it seemed that it wouldn't be good use of the board's time nor staff's time to come in for that one agenda item when the board had gone through a pretty extensive set of meetings previously.
Sanderson.
Yes, and in the past, as a sitting president, I've had to, with consultation of the superintendent council, some meetings also. It's not the desired thing, but, that's the reason why we're meeting at 5:30 now, to do some work to streamline what we do. I've been hesitant to say much about anything tonight because of just my emotional thing, so. But flexibility is going to play an important part in all the work that we do. Things come up all the time, situations, scenarios, and being flexible, it helps us bend and not break. So, it's just comments that I have.
President Hardy?
Mr. Burgess.
I have a suggestion that might help to address Mr. Doran's concern while still leaving in flexibility. And I have forgotten what it is. I've had a long day of running an 8-hour meeting myself, so I apologize. Help me come back to it. What were we?
It was about
Mr. Doran?
needing board consensus or action to cancel regular meetings.
Oh, yes. Okay. The the concern over meetings being canceled, I think is legitimate. And what I would suggest, and maybe this helps, maybe it doesn't, but is just that if a meeting is canceled, that an explanation is provided to board members upon its cancellation.
I fully support that.
And I suppose we could include the board members and the public.
Do I want to say who's canceling, who has the power to cancel the meeting?
I think since the president and the superintendent are the ones who set the agenda and do it, that it would be those two people. I don't think the superintendent can cancel it on his own, and I don't think the president should be either. It would need to be the two. Ms. Sanderson.
We notice our meetings, they're published with the agenda in the paper. And when we cancel a meeting, isn't that published also? But not explaining,
It did explain,
okay,
so that's why, it's what we did.
all right.
Okay. I'm more uncomfortable with adding that sentence because I'd rather leave it the same. I guess I'm just reinforcing that regular meetings, we should be planning accordingly. And I'm not, I use the example, but not calling it into question why we canceled the meeting last week. All good intents, all good things, but I am concerned, and actually that's why my concern with the addition on is almost it begs to do it. And when we tell people these are our 2 weeks to meet, we should be meeting. And, when we do our calendar, I think it's very appropriate what we've done, and our board actually, there was one suggestion to cancel another one, and we didn't, because we need to there's enough stuff to keep going. So I'll leave it there, but I would be very concerned about adding that sentence this time. So I have one last comment. Because we talked about the boxes, this is one of the boxes that I think is very appropriate at the beginning of this section, so.
I want to back us up real quick, and you can help me understand this, but my memory came back about the report to the board, and that language is in administrative regulation. It was something that, we were learning as, learning this position. For the report to the board, is that from the committee chair, or is it from the administration, or do we need to specify that here? Is it helpful to specify that?
Okay. If I can speak to longtime practice, it's come from the administration. And the primary action has always come from an administration. The board committee is an advisory committee, and practice that I experienced for a long time was basically administration was the primary moving forward. If it was recommended from the board or somebody else, they looked at it. Management team went through it. Principals went through it, and the board advisory committee, policy committee, they looked at it as one of the stakeholders, just as principals looked at it, and it went out to the public, et cetera, but the report always came through the administration. The policy committee has, will add their recommendation to it, and there may be things they send back to the administration, that these are recommendations, the administration goes through and says, oh yeah, that makes sense, or it doesn't, and then can address those in their report. But it's, my understanding and practice has worked well through the administration.
Yeah. I would share your understanding, and I think it's any superintendent that comes into the role would hopefully understand that responsibility, that it's the administration presenting and bringing forward the policy for the board to work through.
Okay. I think the administrative regulation might actually say it's from the chair of the committee, which is maybe why, but we can look at that in AR. So,
Yeah, and there might be when we talk about committees, that I think it's important. I do have some strong feelings regarding that.
okay. Page 36, policy 9322.
I think that one was flagged for that highlighted area, and I know we got legal opinion on that. Dr. Meinert?
Yeah, the legal opinion is that this is would be more in line with what other school districts have within their policy. But our policy, the way it was written previously, is acceptable as well.
I was one of the ones who really wanted this added because I faced a situation last year where I didn't feel our policy was doing us justice, but there are a few things that I would like changed in that sentence. So if the president is unwilling to place an item on the agenda for board consideration, I think it should be 3.
Yeah, I agree.
Or more board members may make a formal request, and then in writing or during board comments in an open meeting to the president, because I feel either one of those, either you're making it in public in one of our regular meetings, or you can do it in writing outside of a regular meeting. But it gives the opportunity for a board member to say, I really want this, and other board members to voice they would also like this without breaking the Open Meetings Act. And then the rest is good. One, can you add during an open meeting? Because you've got during board comments, but it's after,
During an open,
in board comments, that would work too.
that looks good.
Dr. Meinert?
One other item, I think we talked a little bit about this at the work session, and I know other school districts have something similar where it says the school board president and the superintendent shall prepare an agenda for each meeting of the school board. In my conversations with some school board members, they think that this precludes the president from inviting them into that conversation, and I wouldn't want board members to feel that way. And so I don't know if it's necessary to add language or if that's an AR, but if the superintendent or the president feels like a board member would be helpful in crafting the agenda for specific pieces, I feel like they should have the authority to do that. And some school districts have policy that clearly states that.
I'm sorry, can you help me with that? So if,
Mr. Doran, I know you've been waiting and I missed, and then
Okay, well, I think to part of that, it's interesting. I don't know that it's needed in policy. I think we've, as I've watched the board over decades and before I was on it and then since, an invitation has often been extended. Any board member can come to it. Very seldom does that happen. Very, very seldom does that happen. I think certainly inviting somebody to it, and I think that has also happened in terms of sometimes when the president is crafting the agenda with the superintendent, but may be going to be absent from the meeting, they've invited the vice president or who's ever going to be the presiding officer into that meeting, so they're part of the conversation ahead of time. So if we need to put it in, then certainly, I think that's, but I think it's there. I think that's something that's helpful with it, and we used to have it on the board calendar as a regular piece, is the agenda setting meeting from the superintendent, that when the superintendent and the president met. And then board members know, and that also gives them a little bit of a heads up to say, oh, here's, something for you to consider, whatever. And I think, and if a board member really felt, well, gee, that would be, could talk to the president and say, hey, mind if I stop in or, come in with it or something. There are times when, that even as part of that meeting, there's a conversation that the superintendent and the president might be important to have on background information or something that you don't necessarily want a lot of other years, and that can be done years there, and that can be done separate, after the executive assistant leaves or whatever. So it is an important thing, but that could be a good thing, again, not in policy, but it's in practice, or maybe in an AR if we wanted. I hesitate adding more paperwork to it, but that would be a good thing to have on calendar. Which, if I can hitchhike onto the piece that does concern me with this. By the way, I do agree, 3 is, if 3 members say, hey, this is it, and it's good to be able to present the ideas. I still would say, and because I've done it, sometimes I've sent both of you, or the president, whoever's been in the superintendent seat and president seat, my ideas. And sometimes I'll mention them in public then, but giving a heads up. Again, I think to the comment that was made earlier, you don't want to surprise anybody. But to find out if there are other board members who are interested, they know they can speak up or say anything. But the sentence, second paragraph there is or third, school board members may place any item on the agenda. That seems to be in some conflict with when we talk about giving ideas, and then if there's 3 members, if any member can say 5 days before, Thursday typically is when our agenda goes out, I can walk in and say, well, I want this on the agenda. It may not be appropriate, because it may be that pulling documentation, information together, there may be a lot of things. So I'm hesitant. I really don't think that serves us well.
I think it's written poorly, because that's not, here we clearly say they can't. School board members can't place items on the agenda. Only the president places an item on the agenda.
Right. So I think
So
that
you
should
could
be
say school board
struck.
members may request an item be
Yeah.
placed on the agenda. It
I
doesn't
would
mean-
just
or we
take
can
it
take it out,
off.
that's fine too.
You can request anytime.
And point of clarification here, the 2 highlighted sentences were added as part of that work session, and I can see that there's a redundancy with the first sentence and the second sentence, so I think we need to pick one of those, and then I'm not sure what our intent was with this third sentence.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would just take that one out.
Take it out? Okay. And then do we like the first sentence or the second sentence better?
Right.
Agenda items will be set by the board president in conjunction with the superintendent. That's our policy language. And then school board president and the superintendent shall prepare an agenda for each meeting. You like second?
Sorry, I'm not sure where you are.
The very first sentence at the very top, under construction of agenda.
Oh,
Remove the first one? Remove the second one? Okay. Okay, sorry about that.
Now it just says agenda items will be set by the board president in conjunction with the superintendent.
Then the clarification is that days prior, if 3 board members want something on the agenda, then they can either request that it's done or at a meeting, bring it forward so that it, okay.
Like Mr. Doran said, that school board members can always request an item on the agenda. And where it says if the president is unwilling to place an item, that is your workaround.
I've certainly been unwilling.
It's okay. You have to have the power to give it away, was my thing, and I am giving it away.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that it has to be scheduled on a certain time, I mean, because again, a lot of these, and I kind of like the second sentence, because we need, as a board, we need the superintendent on with it, who might say, well, you know, there are circumstances that this is not the meeting to put it on, but I think if they work together, anyway, so.
It made it so it's
So-
prescriptive, and that last thing, once the request has been received, the board president shall place the item on a future agenda in a timely enough manner to appropriately address the agenda item. So you can't schedule it for the last day of a board member's term. You have to,
You can.
no, it says a timely enough manner to appropriately address the agenda item.
But if I don't ask until October 15th. Anyway, okay. Okay.
Can you put me in the queue?
Mr. Burgess and then Mr. Doran.
Okay. So a couple things, and so in talking or hearing about other boards, it's my understanding that some other boards in the state, their common practice is to have more than the board president attend the agenda setting meetings, and I don't know. I haven't been able to look into this issue in more detail. I apologize. Whether that's in policy for boards or if it is just practice. But I think that it's not a bad idea to say that there should be more than just the president present. Because for a couple reasons. And one is because it shares the burden a little bit. So the president and vice president can be present, can be there, and gives us an automatic backup if the president can't make it for some reason. But so that's just a couple thoughts there. But I think that I'm still kind of forming my opinion on this. I want to talk to other boards that have this practice and see how it works. The other thing that I noticed is minor, and it's that we refer in at least one location here to the board secretary, and we don't have a board secretary. We have an executive assistant. So that language should be changed. There's also an extra space or two in around that same area. So just some cleanup.
Mr. Doran?
Just to respond to those comments, I would not require a third person. Speaking also as experience as a president, to get the president and the superintendent together is one deal. To add, and having a set date for that or day is whatever works for them. Could be a Wednesday, it could be a Thursday, or Friday, but the two of them work that out. I think that knowing that if you really felt the need to be there, you could ask the president, hey. But if we have it on the calendar, we know it. But requiring it, and then if they need to change over the course of a year, an individual meeting, then they can do that, and it would adjust. I mean, different people come up with different things. The other area on this section is the last paragraph on page 36. we use at least the agenda at least 4 calendar days. We really say notice of meetings, which is the agenda, it should include the agenda, is 5. And that should be, I mean, not sure why we're changing procedure. 5 days should be, everything should be out there, and that's been our practice. And I think it's good when you say we're meeting and these are the things we're talking about, all the agenda items should be there.
Bottom of page 36, it's the number 4, and then but at least 4 calendar days if you're looking for it. So changing it to 5.
Yes, thank you.
And that should be in keeping with our other notice, so.
So I guess circling back to the conversation about the agenda setting, I'm just gonna be real with you and what occurs currently. And I mean, we did it a day ago too. It is very fluid. Dr. Meinert's schedule is very full, and oftentimes it is playing, all right, where can you squeeze things in? It has switched from Fridays to Thursdays to Mondays to Wednesdays, and it moves all that. We just recently moved one so that we can both attend the Project Search graduation to a later date. So to have us have to put it on a calendar and Carm update it, we're making so much more work for ourselves. I would say if board members feel like they would like to come to those, please text me. I'm not secretive about it. I can tell you when it is, but it is a ever-moving target, and sometimes it's, can we even have it this week? And there is, like Mr. Doran said, a section in which we're setting an agenda, and then I know many board members have scheduled meetings that they have with Dr. Meinert regularly. That is also my scheduled 30 minutes at the end of the agenda setting meeting where I bring my concerns as a board member to Dr. Meinert that are separate from setting the agenda. That is, like Mr. Doran said, conversations I want to have between myself and the superintendent. And we just bundle those into 1 hour package because that's the most effective way for us to both end up in the same place at the same time. Yeah. Was that talking or just thumbs up? Ms. Sanderson.
So I would piggyback on everything you said, because as a sitting president, there's so many things that change. And, you know, just having that meeting, getting your agenda set, getting the information from the different, departments and all that to make a fluid meeting and one that's informative, you know, you're doing your work. And that's just part of your presidential duties. So you either have the flexibility to flow and be that, or, you know, you have a lot of things that get in the way of you performing your job as a president. And it just makes it more complicated. Plus, on top of visiting schools, dealing with emails, I mean, it gets crazy. So defining it is one thing, carrying it out and having it fluid. And, you know, I think some of the language that's been added tonight has done that. But, you know, I encourage Mr. Burgess, thank you for your comments, and maybe one day you or Ms. Marple will be president and you will share in these joys of it.
We've only got 2 left, but I would really love us to be out of here by 9. So with that in mind, we can do this, but let's try to get out of here by 9.
Yeah.
We do have a work session scheduled next Monday too on this chapter. Just
I'm an hour ahead of y'all too.
I think we are moving to page 39, agenda meeting materials, unless somebody else had something left.
We actually just worked on that one, right? So we're on 43, the last one, policy 9324.
Oh, that was AR, that's why. Ha,
Yeah.
there we go. Awesome, last one. Go team.
Okay, so let me get to this policy really quick, 9324. This was flagged to review and approve specifically about this third sentence into the first paragraph about whether or not we want to hold on to, I think that it was a conversation around YouTube videos and how long we keep some of the video recordings. And the fact that we do it forever maybe, and maybe we don't need to do that is my memory of the conversation.
That is the memory. We were told by ASB that they do not suggest that we do this. We've been told by, I think, legal that we do not suggest that we do this. And myself as a board member wish to ignore both legal and ASB and continue to archive these forever because our community expects it, and in transparency, I think it would really upset some people if we didn't. Mr. Doran?
Okay, so question, is I'm hearing audio and I'm hearing video, and they're separate?
That
What-
was my mistake. That I was thinking of, maybe it was a conversation that went into the YouTube videos, but the paragraph is specific to audio recorded and whether or not those need to be retained forever.
We do, and what's legal said in terms of audio versus video?
I don't think I've not asked them the distinction on audio and video. What legal has said is your minutes are your official record of the meeting, and so they would not encourage the board to continue the practice of having audio and video available publicly on your website for eternity, because the minutes are that official record of your meeting.
Mr. Doran, then Ms. Maple.
Then with that background, we have changed our minutes where they were not quite verbatim, but they were close to it. I like the way we do our minutes now. I think, and for efficiency's sake and the work of the executive assistant. That being said, it tells me that we definitely need one or the other. I don't think I mean, the video has audio, so I don't know that we need to keep both, but the audio gives the background conversation. The minutes reflect the actions, and we've streamlined the minutes, and because we can do the audio that we didn't used to be able to do as easily. So, so I would say that we keep one because it backs up what the minutes are very brief, and the understanding what's the intent of the board in taking an action at a given time, I think is important, and as part of that information being open about why we vote, the way we vote, or what our thoughts are.
Ms. Maple.
I feel very torn on this. Minutes are intended to share and, preserve action, not comments. And I think that the retained video or audio works against that in a lot of cases. So in theory, I don't like it. I don't want them preserved forever because I think the purpose that what we are obligated to do is preserve a record of the action taken, which our minutes do. With that said, I do agree with Ms. Hardy that I think that there will be people that are upset about that. And I don't want to make decisions based off, I want to make decisions based off what we should do and what is in the best interest of our district and not in what won't make somebody angry, which is a really sticky place to sit. So I totally get your intention, and I'm not gonna, I think it is powerful enough to not push back against it, but I do think it is just relevant to, or important to acknowledge that, it's making a decision based off not upsetting people, even though that is not necessarily, it is not what is prescribed of us. Yeah, torn. I'm torn.
Ms. Sanderson.
Yeah. What legal advice have we been given concerning this? Have we?
Yeah, their recommendation is not to have audio and video publicly available, that the minutes stand as your record of the meeting.
In every meeting I've ever been to, every board I've sat on, even the NEA board for over 8 years, so I think I'd like us to come into compliance with the advice that was given.
Mr. Doran.
The importance of preserving an audio, I don't care which format, but an audio, is not just for the public, but I know I have found it very worthwhile going back and sometimes multiple years to get an understanding of why the board made a decision at a certain time. You know, so before we changed things, it was very informative to the board, both as a member and then as an officer of the board and as president, before bringing forward another action to have that understanding. And I guess enough times over the years, the question has come up, well, where did this come from? And just having a context for that is helpful. And it's good to have an actual record of that, not just Tim's memory of it, or whoever it might be, but I'll use myself as the example. And I've gone back and listened to it and I said, oh, okay, now, yeah, that's really what it was, and there's reason. So I think it's very, very valuable for us to have. It may not be absolutely legally necessary, but I think it really helps to inform us as a board and inform actions as we go. Now, do we need it for 50 years? I don't know that, but I do think it's, and do we need both formats? No. I guess the big question is, how burdensome is it to keep it? It's already recorded.
Not burdensome, but there is a cost to it. We have storage costs with Google, who stores YouTube for us in a way, and so I don't think it's a large cost, but there is a cost, a continued cost of storing video.
And do we, in terms of information we should have, we save everybody's email? Is that right? I know you still have my principal emails somewhere as archived.
We archive emails, yes, that's correct.
So,
because they're a matter of public record.
Okay. And would it be less cost? Do you know if we said not the video, but just the audio? I don't know if one platform is better.
Yeah, I would imagine the storage of just audio would be cheaper. It takes up less room than what video does.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would strongly say that for our purposes, seeing the number of times that it's been helpful in a very small picture of things, that it's well worth our keeping an audio version. So whichever format, I don't have any great feelings.
So,
President Hardy.
Mr. Burgess.
I support Mr. Doran's comments. Maybe we can put a schedule of retention on the audio, because, I doubt we need to review things. I doubt it would be helpful to go all the way back to, say, the 1980s or 2002 even, or something like that. So, putting a retention schedule in this, I would potentially support that. But I am still not clear why the advice from legal is to not retain the audio. It's really, I understand that that's what they're saying, that it's going beyond what's actually required, but I don't understand why that's a bad thing. It's transparent for the public. It allows folks to review actions that have occurred. It allows board members to go back and look at the reasoning behind why a certain decision was made, or so if there's liability associated with it, maybe that could be clarified by legal. And then the question becomes, well, is it liability or is it accountability or both? And I think that having an audio record of board proceedings provides more accountability and more transparency. And I think that's very important. And it's also a useful tool in other ways. So I fully support retaining audio and potentially video. I could go either way on video, but certainly support retaining audio of the meetings for a certain period of time that we could determine. I think it should be more than 5 years and less than 20.
So in the interest of time and also that we have board members who aren't here, I think we should flag this one as one that comes back to be talked about by the full board. I think there's enough discussion. I will just add my last, just more clarification. When I said it will make people mad, that's not my overarching reason why. And I didn't mean to imply that we make decisions based on the feelings of others. It's more in that our community has become accustomed to something, and to just switch it up on them is going to erode trust. Our assembly preserves all of their videos. This school board has had the practice of preserving audio for a long time. Gavel to gavel is preserved at the state level. So there is already an expectation that these things are there. And I know as myself, before I ever became a board member, I went back and was listening to things that happened in the past. How I found out about the joint session where the money, when we had a surplus, and how all that came about was because I re-listened to that entire last joint meeting audio. And that helped me become a better board member. So from a historical perspective, this does help. What I remember from our legal was that it could be used against us in court. As here we're providing something that we don't have to, and it could possibly be used against us. So their job is to protect our best interest. That's what legal advice does. And they're going to err on the most conservative way of doing that. But it doesn't mean that that's necessarily the best advice for our community and what they want. I side with what I've heard Mr. Doran and Mr. Burgess say. I'd be perfectly fine if it was audio. I'd kind of prefer that, actually. But having a record that our public can go back and listen to past meetings, I think has been a valuable tool for myself and most likely others. Mr. Doran.
My last comment for tonight, that as far as I know, is just we put on the tickler relative to our discussion tonight is digital devices during board meetings. I know the Assembly has a memo that addresses that, but I think it's something that I've seen more in previous boards than in recent years, but we should address digital devices. We do have it. I think it's part of our expectations not to be used, but we might want to put that in policy and somewhere in here. I just couldn't figure out where.
Dillard is taking note of that.
I am.
Awesome. With that, because we don't need a motion since the work session, we are adjourned.